At 10:45 on a rain-black Tuesday night in rural Oregon, Dr. Maren Vale hears someone pounding on her clinic door like death itself is hunting them. Outside stands a stranger in a blood-soaked designer suit, gunshot wound tearing through his shoulder, refusing the hospital because they'll find me there. She lets him in. By dawn, armed men are asking questions. Her business card turns up on a dead body. The veterinarian who wanted nothing but a quiet life just stitched together the head of a criminal empire, and now his enemies know her name. This is a story about survival, lies, impossible choices, and two people who should never have met. If you're watching, hit that like button and drop a comment with your city so I can see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The rain came down like nails on sheet metal, drumming against the roof of the Vale Animal Clinic hard enough to drown out the classic rock station Maren had left playing in the back room. She was bone-tired, the kind of exhaustion that settled into your shoulders after a 12-hour shift spent wrestling a dehydrated calf back from the edge, neutering 3 feral cats, and explaining to a tearful 8-year-old why her guinea pig wasn't going to make it past the weekend. The clinic smelled like disinfectant and wet dog, and Maren's scrubs were stained with about 4 different species worth of bodily fluids. She was locking the medication cabinet when the pounding started, not knocking. Pounding, fists against glass like someone was trying to break through or break down, desperate and rhythmic and wrong. Maren froze with the key still in the lock, her pulse kicking up in her throat. The clinic sat a quarter-mile off the main road, surrounded by Douglas firs and darkness. Her nearest neighbor was a retired couple who went to bed at 8. Nobody came out here after hours unless it was an emergency. An emergency is usually called first. This wasn't a call. Maren grabbed her phone from the counter, thumb hovering over 911, and moved toward the front door. Through the rain-streaked glass, she could make out a figure, tall, broad-shouldered, swaying slightly like he was drunk or hurt, or both. Another round of pounding rattled the door in its frame. "We're closed," Maren called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "There's an emergency vet clinic in Corvallis, 20 minutes east on the highway." The pounding stopped. The figure pressed closer to the glass, and for the first time Maren got a clear look at him. Custom-cut suit, dark gray and expensive-looking, even soaked through with rain. Black hair plastered to his skull. Face that might have been handsome if it wasn't twisted with pain and streaked with something that looked an awful lot like blood. He was holding his left shoulder with his right hand, and even through the distortion of the wet glass, Maren could see the dark stain spreading across the fabric. "Please," his voice carried through the door, low and rough. "Not an animal, me." Every instinct Maren had developed over 30 years of living alone, working alone, and generally minding her own business screamed at her to step away from that door, lock it tight, and call the sheriff. But she was also a doctor, not the kind that treated people, but close enough that the Hippocratic oath still rattled around in her head sometimes. And the man outside was bleeding. She unlocked the door. He half fell through it the second the latch gave way, catching himself against the doorframe with a grunt that sounded like it cost him. Up close, he was even more out of place than he'd seemed through the glass. Mid-30s maybe, with sharp cheekbones and gray eyes that tracked her movements with an intensity that made her want to step back. The blood wasn't just on his shoulder. It was on his hands, his collar, dripping onto her linoleum in fat, dark drops. "Gunshot?" Maren heard herself ask. "Yes." "Hospital's 15 minutes south. I can call you an ambulance." "No." He straightened, swaying, and fixed those gray eyes on her with something that looked like desperation trying to wear the mask of command. "No hospital, no ambulance. They'll find me there." "They who?" "People who want me dead." Maren should have shoved him back out into the rain right then. Should have locked the door and called 911 and let the professionals sort out whatever mess this man had dragged to her doorstep. But he was bleeding on her floor, and his face had gone the color of old newspaper, and she was already moving toward him with her hands out like he was a spooked horse that might bolt. "Exam room," she said. "Now, before you pass out and I have to drag you." He followed her on unsteady feet, trailing blood and rainwater across the clinic floor. In the harsh fluorescent light of the exam room, he looked worse, skin clammy, breathing shallow, that expensive suit ruined beyond saving. Marin pointed at the steel table in the center of the room. Sit, shirt off. He obeyed with the mechanical precision of someone running on fumes and willpower, peeling the jacket off first and letting it fall to the floor in a wet heap. The dress shirt underneath was harder. He got 3 buttons undone before his hands started shaking too badly to continue. Marin stepped in without asking, her fingers making quick work of the remaining buttons. The fabric peeled away from the wound with a wet sound that made her stomach turn. Entry wound high on the left shoulder, maybe 2 inches below the collarbone. No exit wound that she could see, which meant the bullet was still in there. The bleeding had slowed to a seep, but the tissue around the entry point was already swelling, angry red fading to purple at the edges. When? Marin asked, pulling on gloves. 2 hours. Maybe 3. You drove here? Someone drove me, dropped me at the road. And just left you? His mouth twitched in something that wasn't quite a smile. I told him to. Marin pulled her rolling stool over and sat, eye level with the wound now, cataloging what she could see and what she couldn't. She'd pulled bullets out of animals before. Ranch dogs who'd gotten too curious during hunting season, a horse that had been on the wrong end of a property dispute. This wasn't that different, except it was, because this was a person, and people had lawyers and families and ways of making your life complicated if things went wrong. I'm a veterinarian, Marin said flatly. Not a surgeon, not a doctor. If that bullet hit anything important, you could bleed out on this table, and there's not a damn thing I can do about it. Understood. You could get an infection, nerve damage. I don't have the right equipment for this. I know. Then why the hell did you come here? He met her eyes, and for a second she saw past the pain to something colder underneath. Because a hospital means police reports and questions and security cameras, and the people looking for me have access to all of that. Here, I'm just another bleeding animal you patched up and forgot about. The logic was airtight and completely insane, and Marin knew she should refuse, should call someone, should do literally anything except what she was about to do. She rolled to her supply cabinet and started pulling equipment. Local anesthetic, forceps, scalpel, suture kit, gauze and antiseptic, and a basin for the blood. She worked in silence, prepping the wound site with the same methodical care she'd use on a dog or a cat or a goddamn ferret, because her hands knew the routine even if her brain was screaming that this was wrong, this was dangerous, this was going to come back and bite her. This is going to hurt, Marin said. I know. She injected the local in a ring around the wound, watching his face for a reaction. He barely flinched. Either he had a pain tolerance that would make a saint jealous, or he'd been through worse. Marin didn't want to think about which option was more likely. The bullet had lodged itself against the scapula, thank God, which meant it hadn't torn through anything immediately fatal. Marin worked it loose with the forceps, her movements small and precise, while sweat gathered at her hairline and her heart hammered against her ribs. The man, she still didn't have a name for him, sat perfectly still, barely breathing, watching her hands with the focus of someone trying to stay conscious through sheer spite. The bullet came free with a wet clicking sound and dropped into the steel basin with a ping that seemed too loud for something so small. Got it, Marin said, and heard the shake in her own voice. She cleaned the wound channel, packed it with gauze, and started suturing. The man didn't make a sound, but she could feel the tension radiating off him, every muscle locked tight. By the time she tied off the last stitch and taped a pressure bandage over the site, her hands were trembling. Done, Marin said, stripping off the gloves. You'll need antibiotics, real ones, from a real doctor. And if that shoulder starts leaking pus or you spike a fever, you get yourself to a hospital whether they find you or not. Understood? Understood. Good. Now get out. He didn't move. Just sat there on her exam table, bare-chested and bandaged, looking at her with an expression she couldn't read. I can't pay you, he said quietly. Not yet, but I will. I don't want your money. Then what do you want? I want you gone before whoever shot you figures out where you went. Something that might have been respect flickered across his face. He reached for his ruined shirt, managed to get it draped over his shoulders, if not properly buttoned, and slid off the table. He swayed once, caught himself, and looked around like he was trying to remember where he'd left his jacket. That's when Marin heard the low, rumbling growl. Atlas had been sleeping in her office when the man arrived. Her scarred-up rescue shepherd, with the cloudy left eye and the temperament of a bouncer. Now he stood in the doorway, hackles raised, 70 pounds of muscle and suspicion aimed directly at the stranger bleeding in her exam room. "Easy," Marin said, but she wasn't sure if she was talking to the dog or the man. "He yours?" the man asked, voice careful. "Yeah, and he doesn't like strangers." "Smart dog." Atlas growled again, deeper this time, but he didn't advance. Just held his ground between Marin and the door, yellow eyes locked on the stranger like he was calculating the best angle of attack. The man bent slowly, carefully, and picked up his jacket from the floor. When he straightened, he looked at Marin one more time. "Thank you," he said. "Don't come back." "I won't." He walked past Atlas with the kind of measured calm that suggested he'd been threatened by bigger and meaner, out through the front room and into the rain. Marin followed at a distance, watched him disappear into the darkness beyond her parking lot, and locked the door behind him with shaking hands. Only then did she let herself look at the exam room. Blood on the floor, blood on the table, blood in the basin with the bullet still sitting at the bottom like an accusation. Her stomach rolled over on itself, and for a second she thought she might actually throw up. Instead, she grabbed the mop and a bottle of industrial cleaner and got to work erasing every trace of what had just happened. By the time she finished, it was past midnight. The rain had slowed to a drizzle. Marin locked up the clinic, walked the 50 yards to her small house behind it, and stood in the shower until the hot water ran cold. She didn't sleep. At 6 a.m., she made coffee and tried to pretend the night before hadn't happened. Atlas watched her from his bed in the corner, still on edge, his good ear swiveling toward every sound. Marin told herself it was fine. The man was gone. Probably halfway to the state line by now. Whatever trouble he'd been in, it wasn't her problem anymore. Then she heard the footsteps on her porch. Her heart dropped straight into her stomach. She moved to the window, pulled the curtain back an inch, and looked out. The man from last night stood on her porch, upright and steady, wearing a clean black shirt and dark jeans that definitely hadn't come from the bottom of a ditch. His left arm hung stiff at his side, but the color was back in his face. He wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, both built like they spent their off hours throwing cars for fun. One of them said something Marin couldn't hear, and the man from last night shook his head. Then he turned and looked directly at her window. Marin dropped the curtain and stepped back, pulse hammering. A knock sounded at the door. Polite, patient, absolutely terrifying. She thought about not answering, thought about calling the sheriff, thought about grabbing Atlas and running out the back door and not stopping until she hit Canada. Instead, she opened the door. The man stood there with his hands visible and empty, his expression carefully neutral. Up close, in daylight, he looked different, sharper, more deliberate, like someone who'd spent the night remembering how to be in control. "I'm sorry," he said. "I know I said I wouldn't come back." "Then why are you here?" "Because I need to ask you a favor." "No." "My assistant is going to arrive in 30 minutes with a question about vaccines for a livestock transport. You're going to tell her you don't do large animal calls, but you can recommend someone. Then she's going to leave, and we're never going to see each other again." Marin stared at him. "What the hell are you talking about?" "I'm talking about keeping you safe." His voice dropped, taking on an edge that made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. "The people who shot me are thorough. They'll check hospitals, clinics, anywhere I might have gone for help. When they don't find me in the system, they'll start looking at off-book options. I need my assistant to show up here asking normal questions so that if anyone checks later, there's a paper trail that says I was never here." "You're insane." "I'm careful. There's a difference." "And if I say no?" His expression didn't change, but something shifted in his eyes. "Then I'll leave, and you'll probably be fine. Probably. But if I'm wrong, and they trace me here, and they think you helped me..." He let the sentence hang. Marin's hands clenched into fists at her sides. "You brought this to my door. You bled on my floor, and now you're telling me I'm in danger because I tried to help you?" Yes. At least he was honest. Marin wanted to scream, wanted to shove him off her porch and call the police and let them sort out whatever criminal nightmare he dragged into her life. But she could see the truth in his face. He wasn't bluffing. He wasn't exaggerating. He was giving her the only warning she was going to get. "Fine," Marin bit out. "Your assistant shows up, I play along, then you disappear, and I never hear from you again." "Deal. What's your name?" The question came out before she could stop it. He hesitated, and for a second she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Cassian? Cassian Rook. Marin Vale. I know. He said it quietly, like an apology. I saw it on your diploma. Before she could respond, he turned and walked back to the black SUV idling in her driveway, the two big men falling into step behind him like synchronized shadows. Marin watched them drive away, her coffee going cold in her hand and her mind racing through every terrible decision she'd made in the last 12 hours. Atlas came to stand beside her, pressing his scarred head against her leg. Yeah, Marin muttered. I know. I'm an idiot. 28 minutes later, a woman in a crisp blazer and impossible heels showed up, asking about livestock vaccines. Marin gave her 3 recommendations and watched her drive away in a sensible sedan. No black SUV, no armed men, just a routine Tuesday morning business call that would look completely normal to anyone checking later. Marin went back inside, locked the door, and tried to convince herself it was over. It wasn't over. That night, lying awake in her bedroom with Atlas sprawled across the foot of the bed, Marin heard Cassian Rook's voice through the wall. Her house shared a heating vent with the guest bedroom, a design flaw she'd been meaning to fix for 2 years. Sound traveled through it like a telephone line, and tonight she could hear every word Cassian said on the phone in that room. Cleanup crew to the warehouse on Mercer. No witnesses. I don't care what it costs. Protective detail on the veterinarian. Yes, the civilian, because I said so. 48 hours, then I want her swept for surveillance and moved if necessary. Marin's blood went cold. She wasn't a civilian who'd helped a stranger. She was a liability who needed managing. And outside, just visible through her bedroom window, a black SUV rolled past her driveway with its headlights off. Marin didn't move from her bed for a full minute after hearing Cassian's voice through the vent, her body locked in place while her brain tried to process what he'd just said. Protective detail. Surveillance sweep. Moved if necessary. She wasn't a person to him. She was a problem that needed solving. Atlas lifted his head from the foot of the bed, ears pricked forward, sensing her tension. Marin pressed a hand to her chest, trying to slow her breathing, trying to think. The black SUV outside had disappeared into the darkness, but that didn't mean it was gone. It meant someone was watching her house, cataloging her movements, deciding whether she was a threat or just collateral damage. She should have called the police the second Cassian Rook stumbled through her door. Should have let him bleed out on someone else's floor. Should have done literally anything except what she did, which was stitch him back together and then pretend she could just walk away from whatever mess he'd dragged into her life. Too late now. Marin slid out of bed, moving quietly, even though Cassian was 2 rooms away and probably couldn't hear her anyway. She pulled on jeans and a sweatshirt, shoved her feet into boots, and grabbed her phone. Atlas followed her to the door, nails clicking on hardwood. Stay, Marin whispered. Atlas sat, but his eyes tracked her every movement, sharp and worried. Marin crept through her house like a burglar, avoiding the creaky floorboard by the bathroom and the loose tile in the kitchen that always rattled. She made it to the back door, eased it open, and stepped out into the cold October night. The rain had stopped, but the air still smelled like wet earth and pine. Her breath came out in visible puffs. She needed to see if the SUV was still out there. Needed to know if Cassian was lying about the protective detail or if there really were armed men circling her property like she was some kind of asset that needed guarding. Marin moved along the tree line behind her house, staying low, her boots squelching in mud. She'd grown up in Oregon, spent her childhood running through forests just like this one. She knew how to move quietly, knew how to read shadows. What she didn't know was how to spot a professional. Dr. Vale. The voice came from directly behind her, low and calm, and Marin's heart tried to punch through her ribcage. She spun around, fists coming up in some half-remembered self-defense position from a class she'd taken in college. A man stood 3 feet away dressed in black tactical gear that made him almost invisible against the trees. He was maybe 40, built like a linebacker, with the kind of face that had seen things and decided to stop showing emotion about them. He wasn't pointing a gun at her, but she could see one holstered at his hip. Easy, the man said. I'm on your side. I don't have a side. You do now. He tilted his head toward the house. Dario Venn, I work for Mr. Rook, and you need to go back inside before someone who doesn't work for him sees you out here acting suspicious. Marin's hands were shaking. She shoved them into her pockets. There are people watching my house. Yes. Why? Because the men who shot Cassian are very good at finding loose ends. And right now, you're a loose end. Dario's voice was matter-of-fact, like he was explaining the weather. So, until we're sure they haven't traced him here, you've got a security detail. Lucky you. I didn't ask for this. No one ever does. He gestured back toward her house. Go inside, Dr. Vale. Lock your doors. Try to sleep. And in the morning, when your assistant shows up, you're going to act like nothing's wrong. Can you do that? Marin wanted to tell him to go to hell. Wanted to scream that she was a veterinarian, not some criminal's accomplice, and she had rights. But Dario Venn was standing there with a gun on his hip and absolutely no expression on his face, and Marin had the sudden cold certainty that screaming would accomplish exactly nothing. Fine, she said. Good, now go. Marin went, her legs unsteady, her mind racing. She made it back to her house, locked the door, and sagged against it with her eyes closed and her pulse hammering in her ears. Atlas was waiting for her in the hallway, and she dropped to her knees and buried her face in his fur, trying to remember how to breathe normally. She didn't sleep that night, just lay in bed staring at the ceiling while Cassian Rook moved around the guest room like he owned the place, like he hadn't just upended her entire life with a bullet wound and a phone call. By the time her alarm went off at 6, Marin had decided on a plan. Get through the day without screaming, wait for Cassian to leave like he'd promised, and then sell her house and move to Alaska where nobody would ever find her. It was a terrible plan, but it was all she had. Her assistant Jenny showed up at 7:30, right on schedule, carrying coffee and a stack of charts that needed filing. Jenny was 23, perky in a way that made Marin feel ancient and completely oblivious to the fact that her boss had spent the night harboring a fugitive. Morning, Dr. Vale. You look exhausted. Late night? Something like that. Marin took the coffee and tried to look normal. What's on the schedule? 2 checkups, a spay, and Mrs. Henderson's cat is back for a follow-up on that urinary thing. Jenny glanced around the clinic. Oh, and your cousin's here. He's in the break room. Marin's brain stuttered to a halt. My what? Your cousin? Tall guy, dark hair, super polite. He said he's staying with you for a few days while he recovers from shoulder surgery. Jenny lowered her voice conspiratorially. He's really hot, by the way. I didn't know you had family in the area. Marin's fingers tightened on the coffee cup hard enough to make the cardboard creak. Right, my cousin. I forgot he was coming. She walked to the break room on autopilot, her mind screaming. Cassian was sitting at the small table wearing a gray Henley that probably cost more than her truck, his injured arm held carefully against his body. He looked up when she entered and had the audacity to smile. Morning, cuz. Marin closed the door behind her and kept her voice low and deadly. What the hell are you doing? Establishing cover. If anyone asks why I was here, you've got a story that makes sense. He leaned back in the chair, wincing slightly. Family visiting for a medical procedure? Boring, forgettable, safe. You can't just... I can, and I did. And you're going to play along because the alternative is telling your assistant the truth and watching her panic spiral straight into a police report. Cassian's voice was calm, reasonable, and absolutely infuriating. This buys us both time, Dr. Vale. Use it. Marin wanted to throw the coffee in his face. Instead, she took a long drink and tried to think past the anger. He was right, and she hated that he was right. If she told Jenny the truth now, it wouldn't protect her. It would just drag Jenny into the nightmare too. How long? Marin asked. 48 hours, then I'm gone. And your security detail? Stays until I'm sure you're clear. He met her eyes, and there was something in his expression that might have been regret if she didn't know better. I'm trying to keep you alive, Dr. Vale. Work with me. The break room door swung open and Jenny stuck her head in, beaming. Hey, sorry to interrupt, but Mrs. Henderson just arrived early. Are you ready, Dr. Vale? Yeah. Marin set down the coffee and headed for the door, pausing just long enough to look back at Cassian. Stay out of sight. Yes, ma'am. The morning passed in a blur of routine appointments that felt surreal, given the armed men lurking somewhere outside and the criminal boss pretending to be her cousin in the break room. Marin examined a golden retriever's ear infection, administered vaccines to a nervous tabby, and answered Mrs. Henderson's questions about fiber supplements for cats. all while her brain ran loops around the same basic problem. She was in way over her head and drowning fast. By noon, Jenny had headed out for lunch, leaving Marin alone in the clinic. She walked to the break room and found Cassian exactly where she'd left him, scrolling through his phone with the focused intensity of someone managing a crisis from a distance. "We need to talk," Marin said. Cassian looked up, expression unreadable. "Agreed." "Not here. My office." She led him through the clinic to the small office at the back, closing the door behind them. Atlas was already there, curled up on his bed in the corner, and he lifted his head when Cassian entered, lips pulling back in a silent snarl. "Your dog really doesn't like me," Cassian observed. "He's a good judge of character." Marin crossed her arms, positioning herself between Cassian and the door. "Who are you, actually? And don't give me some vague bullshit about dangerous people. I want the truth." Cassian was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes studying her like he was deciding how much honesty she could handle. Then he sighed and sat down in the chair by her desk, moving carefully to protect his shoulder. "I run an organization that operates outside the law," he said finally. "Import, export, financial services that don't ask questions. Some people call it a syndicate. Some call it a criminal enterprise. I call it a business that fills a need." "You're a mobster." "That's reductive, but sure." Marin felt the floor tilt under her feet. "And the people who shot you? A rival organization led by a man named Draven. He thinks he can expand into my territory by removing me from the equation. He's wrong, but he's persistent." Cassian's voice was flat, matter of fact. "The ambush 2 nights ago was his latest attempt. My team got me out, but not before I took a bullet. I couldn't go to a hospital without tipping him off, so I came here." "Why here specifically?" "Because you were close, off the grid, and unlikely to ask questions." He paused. "I was wrong about that last part." "You think?" Marin's laugh came out sharp and bitter. "You showed up bleeding on my doorstep, turned my life into a crime scene, and now I've got armed men watching my house because you dragged me into your war. Did I miss anything?" "They found your business card." The words landed like a punch. Marin stared at him. "What?" "On one of the men who ambushed me, he had your card in his pocket." Cassian's expression didn't change, but something cold flickered in his eyes. "Draven's people are thorough. They track everything. And if they have your card, they know I came here, which means they're already asking questions about you." Marin's knees went weak. She grabbed the edge of her desk for support. "How? How the hell did they get my card?" "I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out." "That's not good enough." Her voice cracked, anger and fear bleeding together. "You don't get to show up, ruin my life, and then tell me you'll find out why the people trying to kill you are now looking at me. You're right." Cassian stood slow and careful, and for the first time since he'd walked through her door, he looked like the wound in his shoulder actually hurt. "You didn't ask for this. You didn't deserve this. And if I could go back and make a different choice, I would. But I can't. So now I'm trying to keep you alive long enough to fix it. By hiding in my clinic and sending armed babysitters to follow me around? By making sure Draven's people think you're nobody, just a veterinarian who gave me directions and forgot about it. The cover story with your assistant helps. The security detail keeps you safe if the cover story fails, and in 48 hours, I'll be gone and you can go back to your quiet life." "You really think it's that simple?" "No." His voice dropped. "But it's the best option we have." Marin wanted to argue, wanted to scream, wanted to grab Atlas and run until she hit the ocean. But Cassian was standing there with his shoulder bandaged and his eyes steady, and underneath the anger she could see the truth. He was trying. It was a mess, and it was his fault, but he was actually trying to protect her. It didn't make her feel any better. 48 hours, Marin said quietly, and then you're gone, no matter what. Agreed. The office door opened without warning, and Dario Venn stepped inside, moving fast. "We have a problem." Cassian's entire demeanor changed in an instant, the careful neutrality replaced by something sharp and dangerous. "What kind of problem?" "2 men just pulled up outside. They're not ours." Dario's hand moved to the gun at his hip. "One of them is asking Jenny about animal emergencies in the area. The other one's taking pictures of the parking lot." Marin's heart stopped. "What do I do?" "You go out there and be a veterinarian," Cassian said, his voice cold and controlled. Answer their questions. Don't lie unless you have to. And if they ask about me, you've never seen me before in your life. They'll know I'm lying. Probably. But if you tell the truth, you're confirming I was here, which makes you a witness. He looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that might have been an apology. Trust me, Dr. Vale. You don't want to be a witness. Dario moved to the window, peering through the blinds. They're coming to the door. Marin felt her lungs seize up, panic climbing her throat. Cassian stepped closer, his voice dropping to something that was almost gentle. Breathe. You can do this. You're tougher than you think. How do you know? Because you let me in when you should have turned me away. That takes guts or stupidity, and I don't think you're stupid. The knock came at the front door, sharp and authoritative. Marin walked out of her office on legs that felt like they belonged to someone else. Atlas followed, pressing against her side, and she was grateful for the solid weight of him. Jenny was already opening the door, her smile bright and professional. Hi, can I help you? Two men stood on the threshold, both in their 30s, both wearing jackets despite the mild weather, which meant they were probably armed. The one in front had a scar running through his left eyebrow, and the kind of smile that didn't reach his eyes. Hey there, we're looking for someone who might have been in the area a couple nights ago. Tall guy, dark hair, probably injured. You seen anyone like that? Jenny's smile faltered. Injured how? Might have been bleeding, might have needed medical help. This is a vet clinic, Jenny said slowly. We treat animals, not people. Right, but maybe he came by looking for directions, or to use a phone? Marin stepped forward, forcing herself to breathe normally, to look confused instead of terrified. Can I help you, gentlemen? The man with the scar turned his attention to her, and Marin felt his gaze like a physical weight, cataloging her scrubs, her tired eyes, the coffee stain on her sleeve. Dr. Vale, right? I saw your name on the door. That's me. I'm looking for a man who might have come through here Tuesday night, around 11. Dark hair, expensive suit, gunshot wound in the shoulder. Ring any bells? Marin let herself pause like she was thinking about it. Let her brow furrow in that universal expression of trying to remember. Tuesday night, I closed up around 10:30, went straight home. Didn't see anyone matching that description. You sure? Pretty sure I'd remember someone showing up with a gunshot wound. The man smiled, but it was all teeth and no warmth. Right, of course. It's just that we found one of your business cards on a guy who's been asking questions about our friend. Thought maybe there was a connection. Marin's stomach dropped, but she kept her expression neutral. I hand those out all over the county. Must have picked one up somewhere. Must have. The man didn't look convinced. He glanced around the clinic, his gaze lingering on the exam room, the hallway leading to the back. You mind if we take a quick look around, just to be sure? I do, actually. Marin crossed her arms, channeling every ounce of stubborn authority she'd ever used on clients who didn't want to pay their bills. This is private property, and unless you've got a warrant or a damn good reason, you can ask your questions from the doorway. The second man, bigger, quieter, shifted his weight, and Marin saw his hand drift toward his jacket. Atlas growled, low and continuous, the sound vibrating through the room. Scarface looked at the dog, then back at Marin. That animal dangerous? Only to people he doesn't like. You should keep him under control. He's perfectly controlled. He just doesn't like strangers threatening his owner. For a long moment, nobody moved. Marin could feel her pulse hammering in her throat, could see the calculation happening behind the man's eyes. He was deciding whether to push, whether to force his way in, whether she was worth the trouble. Then he smiled again. No threat here, Dr. Vale. Just asking questions. You have a nice day. They left, climbing back into a dark sedan that had seen better days. Marin watched through the window as they sat there for a minute, talking, before finally pulling out of the parking lot and disappearing down the road. The second they were gone, Marin's legs gave out. She grabbed the reception desk for support, breathing hard, her vision swimming. Jenny was beside her instantly, hands on her shoulders. Dr. Vale, are you okay? What the hell was that? I don't know. The lie came out automatically. Probably looking for someone from a bar fight or something. Nothing to do with us. They seemed really intense. Yeah. Marin straightened, forced herself to let go of the desk. If they come back, call the sheriff. Don't let them in. Okay, yeah, definitely. Marin walked back to her office on shaking legs, pushed open the door, and found Cassian standing by the window with Dario beside him, both of them watching the road like wolves tracking prey. "They're gone," Marin said. "For now." Cassian turned to face her, and his expression was harder than she'd seen it, all pretense of civility stripped away. "You did good. I lied to their faces." "Yes, and you're still breathing because of it. They'll come back, probably." He exchanged a look with Dario. "Which means we're moving up the timeline. You're coming with me." Marin's brain stuttered. "Excuse me?" "My estate, 40 miles north in the mountains. It's secure, defensible, and far enough off the grid that Draven's people won't find you there." "I'm not going anywhere with you." "Dr. Vale, I have a business. I have appointments. I have a life here." Her voice was rising, panic bleeding through. "You don't get to just drag me off to some compound in the woods because your enemies know what my clinic looks like." "Those men will be back," Cassian said quietly, "and next time they won't ask politely. They'll tear this place apart looking for evidence, and if they find even a drop of my blood, they'll know you lied. What do you think happens then?" Marin opened her mouth to argue and found she had nothing. Because he was right. Because she could still see the way Scarface had looked at her, calculating her value, deciding whether she was an obstacle or an asset. Because she'd stitched up a criminal boss in her exam room, and now the consequences were rolling downhill like an avalanche. "How long?" she asked, hating the shake in her voice. 48 hours. Maybe less if I can neutralize the threat faster. "And if you can't, then we figure it out. Together." Cassian stepped closer, and for the first time she saw something other than cold control in his face. Something that might have been guilt. "I know I don't have the right to ask, but I'm asking anyway. Trust me for 2 days. Let me keep you safe. And then you can go back to hating me in peace." Marin looked at Atlas, at Dario, at the clinic she'd built from nothing over 8 years of 70-hour weeks and student loan payments. She thought about the men outside, about the business card they'd found, about the lies she'd just told and how easily it could unravel. "Fine," she said, 48 hours. "But Atlas comes with me." "Wouldn't have it any other way." They left an hour later after Marin called Jenny with a story about a family emergency and watching her assistant's face crumple with concern. Marin packed a bag, locked up her house, and climbed into the back of a black SUV with tinted windows and leather seats that probably cost more than her monthly mortgage. Atlas sat beside her, tense and watchful. Cassian sat up front with Dario driving, his phone pressed to his ear as he issued quiet orders in a language Marin didn't recognize. Russian, maybe. Or something Eastern European. The city fell away behind them, replaced by winding mountain roads and thick stands of pine. Marin watched the landscape blur past and tried not to think about how completely she'd lost control of her life. They drove for almost an hour before turning onto a private road that looked more like a driveway for a national park than anything residential. The trees grew thicker here, blocking out the sky, and Marin caught glimpses of fencing and cameras hidden in the undergrowth. "This is your house?" she asked. "My fortress," Cassian said, "but houseworks." The road opened into a clearing, and Marin's breath caught. The estate sprawled across the mountainside like something out of a magazine. Modern architecture blending with natural stone, floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting the forest, multiple wings connected by covered walkways. It was beautiful in an austere, intimidating way, designed to impress and warn in equal measure. Armed guards stood at the entrance, more patrolled the grounds. Marin counted at least 6 before she stopped trying. "How many people work for you?" she asked. "Here, about 30. Elsewhere." Cassian glanced back at her. "More." The SUV stopped in front of the main entrance, and Dario opened Marin's door. She climbed out with Atlas at her heels, her bag slung over her shoulder, feeling wildly out of place in her coffee-stained scrubs and muddy boots. A woman emerged from the house, tall and sharp-edged in tailored black, with the same gray eyes as Cassian and a smile that could cut glass. "So this is the veterinarian," she said, her voice carrying a faint accent Marin couldn't place. "The one who patched you up and nearly got herself killed for the trouble." "Marin Vale. Meet Serena Rook," Cassian said. "My sister." Serena's smile didn't warm. "Welcome to our home, Dr. Vale. I hope you survive your stay." She turned and walked back inside, and Marin looked at Cassian with wide eyes. She's kidding, Cassian said. Is she? Probably. Marin followed him into the house. Atlas pressed against her leg and tried very hard not to think about how badly this could end. The interior was just as impressive as the exterior. High ceilings, minimalist furniture, art that probably cost more than Marin's entire education. Serena led them through a living room the size of Marin's whole house and down a hallway lined with closed doors. Guest wing, Serena said, pushing open a door to reveal a bedroom that looked like it belonged in a luxury hotel. You'll stay here. Bathroom's through that door. If you need anything, there's a phone on the nightstand. Dial 0 for the kitchen, 1 for security, 2 for medical. Medical? We have a doctor on staff. Cassian's paranoid. Serena's smile was all edges, though given recent events, perhaps justified. She left without another word, and Marin stood in the middle of the enormous bedroom, clutching her ratty duffel bag and trying to process the last 6 hours of her life. Cassian lingered in the doorway, watching her with an expression she couldn't read. I know this isn't what you wanted, he said quietly. No, it's not. For what it's worth, I'm sorry. That doesn't fix anything. I know. He started to turn away, then paused. Dinner's at 7. Serena will probably interrogate you. Don't let her intimidate you. Too late. His mouth twitched in something that might have been a smile. Then he was gone, the door clicking shut behind him, and Marin was alone with Atlas in a fortress full of criminals who thought she was worth protecting. She sat down on the edge of the massive bed and put her head in her hands. Atlas whined and pushed his nose against her knee. Yeah, Marin whispered. I know. We're screwed. Dinner was exactly as uncomfortable as Marin had feared. The dining room was formal and cold, all dark wood and expensive china, with Cassian at the head of the table and Serena on his right. Marin sat across from Serena, acutely aware of her jeans and sweater in a room that probably expected cocktail dresses and pearls. A chef brought out courses Marin couldn't pronounce. Some kind of fish in a sauce that tasted like money, roasted vegetables that had probably been sourced from an organic farm in France, bread that melted on her tongue. She ate mechanically, barely tasting any of it, while Serena asked questions that felt like weapons. So, Dr. Vale, how long have you been in Oregon? 8 years. And before that? Vet school in Colorado. Grew up in Washington. Family? My parents retired to Arizona. We're not close. Serena's eyes glittered. No husband? No boyfriend? No. Interesting. Cassian seems to have a habit of attracting women with no attachments. Makes them easier to manipulate, I suppose. Serena. Cassian's voice was quiet, but it carried weight. What? I'm just making conversation. Marin set down her fork, her patience finally snapping. If you've got something to say to me, just say it. I'm too tired for word games. Serena leaned back in her chair, studying Marin like she was a specimen under glass. I think you're either very brave or very stupid. I haven't decided which. Does it matter? To you? Probably not. To my brother? Serena's smile was sharp. Everything matters to Cassian. He doesn't let people in, doesn't trust easily. But here you are, sitting at his table, sleeping in his house under his protection. That makes you either incredibly important or incredibly dangerous. I'm neither. I'm just a vet who made a bad decision. Keep telling yourself that. Serena stood, her chair scraping against the floor. Good night, Dr. Vale. Try not to get my brother killed. She left in a sweep of black fabric, and Marin was alone with Cassian and the remains of a meal she hadn't wanted. She's protective, Cassian said after a long silence. She's terrifying. That too. He picked up his wine glass, swirling the dark liquid. She lost someone a few years ago, someone she cared about. Ever since then, she sees threats everywhere. Am I a threat? Cassian looked at her, really looked at her, and Marin felt the weight of his attention like a hand on her skin. I don't know yet. Great, that makes me feel so much better. You want honesty? Here it is. You're a complication I didn't plan for. A civilian who got caught in the crossfire because I made a mistake. And now I'm trying to fix that mistake before it gets you killed. But Serena's right about one thing. You're under my roof, eating my food, and that means something in my world. It means you're mine to protect, whether you like it or not. The possessiveness in his voice sent a shiver down Marin's spine, equal parts fear and something she absolutely refused to name. "I'm not yours," she said quietly. "Not yet." He stood, moving carefully to favor his injured shoulder. "Get some rest, Dr. Vale. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." He left her sitting at the table, surrounded by empty plates and crystal glasses, and Marin wondered how the hell she'd ended up here. She made it back to her room and fell into bed fully clothed, too exhausted to care. Atlas sprawled across the foot of the bed, his presence a small comfort in an unfamiliar place. Marin didn't expect to sleep, but somehow, in the quiet darkness of Cassian Rook's mountain fortress, she did. She woke to shouting. Marin jolted upright, heart hammering, disoriented in the unfamiliar room. Atlas was on his feet, hackles raised, a low growl building in his chest. The shouting came from somewhere else in the house, men's voices, sharp and angry, cutting through the night. Marin grabbed her phone. 2:47 a.m. She climbed out of bed, moved to the door, and pressed her ear against it. The voices were clearer now, Cassian and someone else, arguing in what sounded like Russian. The other man's voice was unfamiliar, harsh and demanding. Then a crash. Something breaking. Atlas barked, sharp and loud, and Marin's hands fumbled for the door handle. Every instinct screamed at her to stay put, to lock the door and wait for morning. But she'd heard enough violence in her life. From her clinic, from late-night emergencies, from the ugly side of humanity that most people never saw, to recognize when someone was about to get hurt. She opened the door. The hallway was dark, except for light spilling from an open doorway at the far end. Marin moved toward it, Atlas at her side, her bare feet silent on the cold floor. As she got closer, the argument became clearer, switching to English. "Don't care what arrangements you made. You brought a civilian into this house, into our business, and now Draven's people are asking questions." "She saved my life." Cassian's voice was cold, controlled, but Marin could hear the edge beneath it. "And now she's a liability. You should have handled this quietly, but instead you brought her here, gave her a room, fed her at your table like she's one of us. What the hell were you thinking?" "I was thinking I owe her protection. That means she stays here until the threat is neutralized." "The threat won't be neutralized as long as she's alive." Marin's blood turned to ice. She rounded the corner and stopped in the doorway of what looked like Cassian's office. Cassian stood behind a desk, his jaw tight, his gray eyes locked on a man Marin didn't recognize. Older, maybe 50, with silver hair and a face full of old scars. The older man was red-faced, furious, his fists clenched at his sides. Both of them turned to look at her. "Dr. Vale," Cassian said, his voice carefully neutral. "Go back to your room." "Not until I know what the hell is going on." Marin's voice came out steadier than she felt. She looked at the older man. "You think I should be dead?" The man's eyes narrowed. "I think you're a complication this organization doesn't need. Nothing personal." "Sounds pretty personal from where I'm standing." "Marin?" Cassian moved around the desk, positioning himself between her and the other man. "This is Victor Kozlov. He handles security for the syndicate. He's concerned about exposure." "I'm concerned about survival," Victor shot back. "And keeping a witness alive is the opposite of that." "She's not a witness. She's under my protection." "Your protection doesn't mean shit if she talks." "I won't talk," Marin said, her voice shaking now with anger instead of fear. "I don't know anything. I don't want to know anything. I just want to go home and pretend none of this ever happened." Victor laughed, short and bitter. "You think it works that way? You think Draven's people are going to believe you're just some innocent vet who happened to patch up their target? They'll squeeze you until you break. And when you do, they'll find out everything. Our locations, our operations, our weaknesses. You're a bomb waiting to go off. Then what do you suggest?" Cassian's voice had dropped to something dangerous. "Because if you're implying what I think you're implying, we're going to have a problem." Victor met his gaze without flinching. "I'm saying do what needs to be done, before it's too late." The room went silent. Marin felt her knees go weak, but she locked them in place and refused to look away from the man who just suggested killing her like it was a business decision. Atlas pressed against her leg, growling. "Get out," Cassian said quietly. Victor didn't move. "You're making a mistake." "I said get out, now, before I make a different kind of mistake." For a long moment, Victor just stood there, staring at Cassian like he was trying to recognize someone he used to know. Then he shook his head and walked past Marin without another word, his shoulder bumping hers hard enough to make her stumble. The door slammed behind him. Marin stood frozen, her heart trying to beat its way out of her chest, her mind replaying Victor's words on an endless loop. They'll squeeze you until you break. Do what needs to be done. Marin. Cassian's voice was closer now, gentle in a way that didn't match the violence still hanging in the air. Look at me. She couldn't. She was staring at the floor, watching her hand shake, trying to remember how to breathe. Marin! He touched her shoulder, barely a brush of fingers, asking permission instead of taking. And something in her chest cracked open. She looked up at him, this man who'd bled on her floor and lied to her face and dragged her into a nightmare, and all she could think was that one of his own people wanted her dead, and he'd just thrown that person out to protect her. He's wrong, Cassian said quietly. You're not a liability. You're not a bomb. You're just someone who made a choice to help me when you didn't have to, and I will not let anyone punish you for that. Do you understand? He's going to kill me. No, he won't. Cassian's hand tightened on her shoulder, his voice turning hard. Victor's loyal, but he's not stupid. He knows if he touches you, I'll bury him, and he's not ready to die over a disagreement. How can you be sure? Because I've known him for 15 years, and I've never seen him choose principle over survival. Cassian let go of her shoulder and stepped back, giving her space. But to be safe, you don't go anywhere in this house without me or Dario. Clear? Marin nodded, not trusting her voice. Good. Now go back to bed. Try to sleep. I don't think I can. Something shifted in Cassian's expression, something almost human. Then come sit with me. I've got work to do anyway, and you shouldn't be alone right now. It was a terrible idea. Marin knew it was a terrible idea. She should go back to her room, lock the door, and figure out how to escape this place before Victor decided to take matters into his own hands. Instead, she sat down in the leather chair across from Cassian's desk and watched him work. He made phone calls in 3 different languages, his voice shifting from commanding to reassuring to coldly threatening depending on who was on the other end. He reviewed documents on his laptop, signing off on things Marin couldn't see and didn't want to know about. And between calls, he would glance up at her, checking that she was still there, still breathing, still whole. It should have been terrifying, but somehow, in the dark hours before dawn, sitting in the office of a man whose world ran on violence and secrets, Marin felt safer than she had since he'd first pounded on her door, which was probably the most dangerous thing of all. The first light of dawn was filtering through the windows when Cassian finally closed his laptop and leaned back in his chair, wincing slightly as his shoulder protested. You should change that dressing, Marin said, the veterinarian in her overriding the part that wanted to stay quiet. Later. Now. Unless you want it to get infected. Cassian looked at her for a long moment, then stood and unbuttoned his shirt without ceremony. The bandage underneath was clean, which was something, but the skin around it was inflamed. Marin stood and moved closer, her professional assessment kicking in automatically. It's healing, but you're not resting it enough. You need to keep it immobilized for at least another week. I don't have a week. Then you're an idiot. His mouth twitched. Probably. Marin pulled out her phone and took a picture of the wound, cataloging it for her own reference. If this starts leaking pus or you spike a fever, hospital, I know. You already gave me this lecture. And clearly you didn't listen. I listened. I just chose to ignore it. They were standing very close now, close enough that Marin could see the exhaustion in his face, the lines around his eyes that hadn't been there the first night. Close enough that she could smell whatever expensive cologne he wore under the antiseptic tang of bandages. She should step back, should put distance between them before this moment turned into something neither of them could take back. She didn't move. Why did you defend me? Marin asked quietly. Against Victor. You could have agreed with him, made this easier on yourself. Because he's wrong. Cassian's voice was rough. You're not a liability. He stopped, and Marin saw something flicker across his face that might have been fear. I'm what? Someone I don't want to lose. The words hung between them, too honest and too dangerous. Marin's breath caught in her throat. She should laugh it off, should remind him that she barely knew him, that he'd ruined her life, that whatever this was couldn't possibly be real. Instead, she reached up and touched the edge of his bandage, her fingers gentle. You're going to get yourself killed being this reckless. Probably. That's not funny. I'm not joking. His hand came up to cover hers, warm and solid, and Marin felt the world tilt sideways. This was insane. He was a criminal. She was a veterinarian. They had nothing in common except blood on her clinic floor and a mutual inability to make smart decisions. But his hand on hers felt real, felt solid, felt like the only thing keeping her anchored. The office door burst open, and Dario appeared, his face grim. We have a problem. Cassian dropped Marin's hand and turned, every trace of vulnerability vanishing behind cold control. What kind of problem? The men who came to Dr. Vale's clinic yesterday? They're dead, both of them, found in a ditch 20 miles south with execution-style shots to the head. Marin felt the floor drop out from under her. What? Draven sent them to confirm you were lying, Dario continued, his eyes flicking to Marin. When they reported back that you stonewalled them, he decided they'd failed, so he cleaned house. Jesus, Marin whispered. Cassian's jaw tightened. Timeline? Bodies were found an hour ago, which means Draven killed them last night, right after they made their report. He's tying up loose ends. And Dr. Vale is the next loose end. Exactly. Dario looked at Marin, and there was something almost like sympathy in his eyes. He knows you lied now, which means he knows Cassian was there. And if he knows that, he's coming for both of you. Marin's legs gave out. She grabbed the edge of the desk for support, her vision swimming. How long do we have? Cassian asked. Best guess? 48 hours before he makes his move. Maybe less. Cassian nodded, his expression carved from stone. Double the security, no one in or out without my approval. And get Serena, I want a full strategy session in 20 minutes. Dario left, and Marin stayed collapsed against the desk, trying to process the fact that a man she'd never met had just killed 2 people and was now planning to kill her. Marin. Cassian was in front of her, his hands on her shoulders, grounding her. Look at me. She did, and saw something in his face that scared her more than Victor's threats or Draven's body count. He looked like a man who'd just decided to go to war. I will not let him touch you, Cassian said, his voice absolute. Do you understand? Whatever it takes, whatever I have to do, he will not touch you. You can't promise that. Watch me. And in that moment, surrounded by violence and danger and impossible choices, Marin believed him, which was the most terrifying thing of all. The war room was exactly what it sounded like. A windowless space in the basement of Cassian's fortress, lined with monitors showing security feeds from every angle of the property. Maps covered one wall, marked with red pins and handwritten notes in multiple languages. A conference table dominated the center, scarred and solid, surrounded by chairs that had seen better days. Serena was already there when Cassian arrived with Marin in tow, her sharp eyes cataloging Marin's presence with visible disapproval. Dario stood by the monitors, arms crossed, face grim. 2 other men Marin didn't recognize sat at the table, both older, both carrying themselves with the kind of controlled violence that suggested military backgrounds. The veterinarian stays for this? Serena asked, her voice dripping acid. She stays, Cassian said flatly. She's a target now. She deserves to know what we're dealing with. She's a liability that Victor was right about. Victor can take his concerns and, enough. The word came from one of the men at the table, his voice carrying the weight of someone used to being obeyed. He was maybe 60, with iron gray hair and eyes like chips of flint. We don't have time for this. Draven's moving. We need a strategy. Cassian pulled out a chair for Marin, then took his own seat at the head of the table. Marin Vale, meet Marcus Webb and Ivan Petrov. They handle operations and intelligence, respectively. Gentlemen, Dr. Vale is under my protection. Treat her accordingly. Marcus nodded once. Ivan's expression didn't change. Here's what we know, Dario said, pulling up a grainy photograph on one of the monitors. It showed a man in his 50s, hard-faced and cold-eyed, standing beside a black Mercedes. Nikolai Draven, former Russian military intelligence, now running the largest smuggling operation on the West Coast. He's been trying to expand into our territory for 18 months. The ambush on Cassian was his latest move. How do you know where to hit you? Marcus asked. Cassian's jaw tightened. Still working on that, but someone fed him information about my route that night. Someone close. The implication hung in the air like smoke. "You think we have a leak?" Serena said quietly. "I know we do." Cassian looked around the table. "The question is who?" Marin sat frozen in her chair, listening to them discuss betrayal and violence like it was a budget meeting. Atlas pressed against her leg under the table, his warmth the only thing keeping her grounded. "Draven killed his own scouts," Ivan said, his accent thick. "The ones who came to the clinic. That's a message. He's cleaning house, eliminating anyone who failed him, which means he's preparing for something big." "An assault on the estate," Cassian said. "Or a kidnapping." Dario's eyes flicked to Marin. "Dr. Vale's a target now, and Draven's known for taking hostages when direct confrontation's too risky." Marin's stomach lurched. "He'd kidnap me to get to you?" "In a heartbeat," Serena said. "You're leverage now, a soft target he can use to make my brother do something stupid." "Like what?" "Like trade himself for you, or stand down while Draven takes everything we've built." Serena's smile was razor sharp. "Welcome to our world, Dr. Vale. Isn't it charming?" "That's enough," Cassian said, his voice cold. "Is it? Because I'm still trying to understand why we're protecting a stranger instead of eliminating the threat she represents." "Because she's not the threat." Cassian's fist hit the table hard enough to make everyone jump. "Draven is the threat. The leak is the threat. Dr. Vale is a civilian who got caught in the crossfire, and I will not punish her for my mistakes." The room went silent. Marin stared at Cassian, watching the tension radiating off him, and something clicked into place in her mind. This wasn't about keeping her safe. This was about him refusing to become the kind of man who sacrificed innocence to save himself. "We fortify," Marcus said finally, breaking the silence. "Double the perimeter guards, activate the secondary surveillance systems, and keep Dr. Vale inside the inner ring at all times. If Draven wants her, he'll have to come through all of us." "He will," Ivan said quietly. "Draven doesn't back down. He'll hit us, and he'll hit us hard." "Then we hit him first." Cassian leaned forward, his eyes hard. "I want every asset we have tracking his movements. I want to know where he sleeps, where he eats, where he takes a piss. And when we find an opening, we take it." "You're talking about war," Serena said. "We're already at war. I'm talking about winning." The meeting went on for another hour, dissolving into tactical discussions Marin couldn't follow and didn't want to. She sat there feeling like a prop in someone else's play, listening to them plan violence with the same clinical precision she used to plan surgeries. When it finally ended, Cassian walked her back to her room in silence. The sun was fully up now, streaming through the windows, making the fortress look almost normal in daylight. Almost. "You should rest," Cassian said when they reached her door. "I don't think I can." "Try anyway. You look like you're about to collapse." Marin leaned against the doorframe, exhaustion pulling at her bones. "This is insane. All of it. 2 days ago I was neutering cats and worrying about supply orders. Now I'm sitting in a war room listening to criminals plan a kidnapping defense." "I know." "Do you? Because from where I'm standing, you seem pretty comfortable with all this." Cassian flinched, and Marin felt a spike of vicious satisfaction at finally landing a hit. "I grew up in this world," he said quietly. "My father ran the syndicate before me. I learned to read balance sheets and body language at the same time. So yeah, I'm comfortable with it, but that doesn't mean I like what it's done to you." "Then let me leave." "You know I can't do that." "Why? Because I might talk? Because I'm leverage?" Marin's voice was rising, weeks of suppressed fear and anger finally breaking through. "Or because you actually give a damn what happens to me?" Cassian stepped closer, close enough that she could see the shadows under his eyes, the tension in his jaw. "All of the above." "That's not good enough." "It's all I have." They stood there in the hallway, inches apart, the air between them crackling with everything they couldn't say. Marin wanted to scream at him, wanted to hit him, wanted to demand answers he probably didn't have. Instead, she turned and walked into her room, closing the door in his face. She made it 3 steps before her legs gave out. She sat down hard on the edge of the bed, her hands shaking, and Atlas immediately climbed up beside her, resting his heavy head in her lap. "We're so screwed," Marin whispered into his fur. Atlas whined in agreement. Marin didn't sleep. She lay on top of the covers fully clothed, staring at the ceiling, while her mind ran circles around the same impossible problem. She was trapped in a criminal's fortress, hunted by a man who killed his own people for failing, and protected by someone who might be using her as bait without even realizing it. There was no good way out of this. No clever solution that let her go back to her quiet life and pretend none of it had happened. She was in too deep and drowning fast. A knock at the door made her bolt upright. Atlas growled. "Dr. Vale?" Dario's voice, careful and professional. "Cassian wants to see you. On the terrace." Marin wanted to refuse, wanted to lock the door and hide under the covers like a child. But she was 30 years old and a goddamn doctor, even if it was the animal kind, and hiding accomplished nothing. She opened the door. "Lead the way." Dario took her through the house to a set of French doors that opened onto a stone terrace overlooking the valley below. The view was stunning. Mountains rolling away into the distance, pine forests stretching as far as she could see, the sky so blue it hurt to look at. Cassian stood at the railing, his back to her, wearing dark jeans and a white shirt with the sleeves rolled up. His injured arm hung stiff at his side, but otherwise he looked almost normal, almost human. "Thank you, Dario," Cassian said without turning around. Dario left, and Marin was alone with the man who'd turned her life into a war zone. "I made you breakfast," Cassian said, gesturing to a small table set with coffee, pastries, and fresh fruit. "Or lunch, I guess. It's almost 1. Marin blinked at the spread. "You made this?" "The coffee and fruit are from the kitchen. The pastries I actually made. Cooking relaxes me." He finally turned to look at her, and his expression was carefully neutral. "I'm trying to apologize without actually saying the words. Serena says I'm terrible at it." Despite everything, Marin felt her mouth twitch. "She's right." "Probably." He pulled out a chair for her. "Sit, eat, humor me." Marin sat, more because her legs were still unsteady than because she wanted to. She picked up a croissant, flaky and perfect, probably better than anything she'd ever made, and took a bite. It was delicious, which was infuriating. "You're a mobster who bakes," she said flatly. "I'm a man who runs a business that happens to be illegal and also enjoys baking. There's a difference." "Is there?" Cassian poured coffee into her cup, the gesture oddly domestic. "My grandmother taught me. She said a man who can't feed himself is helpless, and helpless men don't survive." She sounds intense. She was. She also taught me to read Dostoevsky and shoot a rifle before I was 10. Very well-rounded education. Marin sipped the coffee, dark and strong, exactly how she liked it, and tried to reconcile the man in front of her with the one who'd ordered a cleanup crew in the middle of the night. They didn't fit together, shouldn't fit together. "Why am I here?" she asked quietly. "Because I wanted to talk to you. Without Serena or Dario or the weight of the syndicate hanging over everything. We're still in your fortress, surrounded by your guards, hiding from your enemies. The weight's still there." "Fair point." Cassian sat across from her, cradling his own coffee cup. "But for 5 minutes, can we pretend we're just 2 people having breakfast on a terrace? And talk about what? The weather? If you want." His mouth twitched. "Or you could tell me why you became a veterinarian." The question caught Marin off guard. She set down her cup, studying him. "You actually care?" "I do." "Why?" "Because I've spent the last 48 hours watching you hold yourself together through things that would break most people, and I want to know what made you that strong." Marin looked away, her throat suddenly tight. Nobody had asked her that in years. Most people assumed she'd chosen veterinary medicine because she liked animals better than people, which was partly true, but it wasn't the whole story. "I was 12, she said quietly. "We had this dog, Copper. He was a mutt, half shepherd, and half who knows what, and he was my best friend. One day he got hit by a car in front of our house. My dad wanted to put him down, said it was kinder. But the vet, Dr. Morrison, she said she could try to save him." Cassian didn't interrupt, just listened. "She worked on Copper for 6 hours, repaired his shattered leg, stitched up internal bleeding, brought him back from the edge. And when she was done, she told me that sometimes the best thing you can do for someone is refuse to give up on them, even when everyone else already has." Marin's hands clenched around her coffee cup. "Copper lived another 8 years. And I decided that's what I wanted to do, give things a fighting chance when the world's already written them off." "Is that what you're doing with me?" Cassian asked softly. "Giving me a fighting chance?" "I don't know what I'm doing with you." That makes two of us. They sat in silence for a moment, the wind moving through the pines, the sun warm on Marin's skin. It felt surreal, this pocket of calm in the middle of chaos, this moment of honesty between two people who shouldn't trust each other at all. I need to tell you something, Cassian said, his voice taking on a harder edge. And you're not going to like it. Marin's stomach dropped. What? The business card Draven's men had. The one they found on the attacker. Cassian set down his coffee, his jaw tight. I know how they got it. How? I gave it to them. The world tilted sideways. Marin stared at him, her brain refusing to process the words. What? Not directly, but I used your clinic as a drop point 6 months ago. One of my people left a package there, another picked it up. Standard protocol for moving product without surveillance. Your card would have been on the reception desk. Someone could have taken it then. Marin's hands started shaking. You used my clinic for your criminal business. Yes. Without my knowledge, without my permission. Yes. And now people are trying to kill me because of it. Cassian's expression didn't change, but she saw something flicker in his eyes. Guilt, maybe, or regret. I didn't think it would matter. You were off the grid, isolated, perfect for a quiet exchange. I didn't know Draven's people were tracking our drops. Didn't know they'd traced it back to you. But they did. Yes. Marin stood up so fast her chair fell over backward. Atlas leapt to his feet, sensing her rage. You son of a bitch! Her voice was shaking, venom in every syllable. You didn't just drag me into this by accident. You made me a target months ago, and you didn't even know it. Didn't even care enough to check. Marin, don't. She backed away from the table, her hands fisted at her sides. You stood there and apologized, made me breakfast, asked about my life like you actually gave a damn. But the whole time you knew this was your fault from the beginning. I didn't know about the card until this morning. I even traced it back through our records. I don't care. Marin's voice cracked, tears burning hot behind her eyes. You used me. Used my clinic. And now I'm here, trapped in your fortress, hunted by your enemies because you decided my life was worth less than your convenience. Cassian stood, his face pale. That's not what happened. Then what did happen? Explain it to me, Cassian. Make me understand how this isn't exactly what it looks like. He opened his mouth, closed it, and in that moment of silence, Marin saw the truth written all over his face. He couldn't explain it, because she was right. I'm sorry, Cassian said quietly. Sorry doesn't fix this. Sorry doesn't undo the last 3 days. Sorry doesn't make me safe. Marin's voice dropped to something cold and hard. You said I wasn't a liability. You said I wasn't a threat. But that was a lie, wasn't it? I was always part of your business. I just didn't know it. You were never supposed to be involved. But I am. Because of you. Because you used my clinic and didn't think about the consequences. You're right. Cassian's hands clenched at his sides, the only visible sign of emotion. You're absolutely right. I made a call 6 months ago that seemed safe at the time, and it put you in danger. That's on me. But I swear to you, Marin, I will fix this. I will make sure Draven never touches you, whatever it takes. What if I don't want your protection anymore? The question hung between them like a blade. Cassian's expression went very still. You don't mean that, don't I? You lied to me, used me, dragged me into your war and then pretended it was some noble rescue mission. Why the hell would I trust anything you say now? Because despite everything, you know I'm the only thing standing between you and Draven. He was right, and Marin hated him for it. She turned away, her eyes burning, her hands shaking so hard she had to shove them in her pockets. The view from the terrace blurred, mountains and trees and sky all running together. I want to leave, she said quietly. You can't. I know. A bitter laugh escaped her throat. That's the real trap, isn't it? You've made me so valuable to your enemy that walking away would be suicide, so I'm stuck here, with you, until this resolves or I end up dead. It won't come to that. You can't promise me that. Watch me. Marin spun back to face him, tears streaking her cheeks now, all her careful control finally breaking. Stop saying that. Stop acting like you have all the power here when we both know you're one wrong move away from getting us both killed. Then what do you want from me? Cassian's voice rose to match hers, his own control fracturing. You want me to grovel? To beg forgiveness for choices I made before I even knew your name? Fine. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I used your clinic. I'm sorry you're in danger. I'm sorry I'm not the man you thought I was. But I can't change the past, Marin. All I can do is try to keep you alive in the present. I don't want to be kept. I want to be free. Then you picked the wrong world to land in. The words hit like a slap. Marin stared at him, this man who'd stumbled bleeding into her clinic and turned her life into ashes, and felt something crack apart inside her chest. I hate you, she whispered. I know. I hate that I trusted you. I hate that I believed you when you said you'd protect me. I hate that I sat at your table and let you feed me and pretended any of this could be okay. I know. His voice was raw, stripped down to something that sounded almost like pain. And I hate that I still need you to keep me alive. I know that too. They stood there on opposite sides of the terrace, the breakfast table between them like a battlefield, and Marin felt the weight of every terrible decision she'd made since the night Cassian Rook first knocked on her door. The French doors burst open and Dario appeared, his face urgent. We have movement. 3 vehicles approaching the outer perimeter. Heavy armament. It's Draven. Cassian's entire demeanor shifted in an instant, the man she'd been fighting with disappearing behind cold tactical precision. How long? 10 minutes, maybe less. Lockdown protocol. Get Dr. Vale to the safe room. Now. No. Marin's voice cut through the chaos. I'm not hiding in a hole while people die because of me. You don't have a choice. The hell I don't. She moved toward him, Atlas at her heels. You said I'm leverage. You said Draven wants me, so let's use that. Cassian's eyes went dangerous. Absolutely not. Why? Because you're worried I'll get hurt? I'm already hurt, Cassian. You saw to that when you used my clinic for your goddamn drug drops. This is different. How? How is this different from any other choice you've made that put my life at risk? Dario cleared his throat. Hate to interrupt, but we're running out of time. Cassian looked between Marin and Dario, his jaw working. Then he grabbed Marin's arm and pulled her close, his voice dropping to something fierce and desperate. If you die because I let you do something stupid, I will never forgive myself. Do you understand that? Then don't let me die. But don't ask me to hide while other people bleed for your mistakes. Marin met his eyes, refusing to look away. I'm already in this. Let me fight. For a long moment, Cassian just stared at her. Then he let go and turned to Dario. Get her a vest and keep her in the inner corridor. If shooting starts, she goes to the safe room whether she likes it or not. Copy that. They moved through the house at a run, Atlas keeping pace beside Marin. Guards appeared from everywhere, armed and focused, turning the elegant estate into a fortress in minutes. Someone shoved a bulletproof vest over Marin's head, too big, heavy enough to make her shoulders ache, and pushed her toward a reinforced hallway lined with monitors. Through the security feeds, Marin watched 3 black SUVs roll up the mountain road like a funeral procession. Draven's not subtle, Serena said, appearing beside Marin with a gun in her hand. He wants us to know he's coming. Why? Marin's voice came out steadier than she felt. Because he thinks we'll panic, make mistakes. Serena's smile was all teeth. He doesn't know my brother very well. The SUVs stopped at the outer gate. Car doors opened. Men climbed out, a dozen of them, all armed, all moving with military precision. And in the center, a man in a dark coat stepped forward. Even through the grainy security feed, Marin could see he was different from the others. Older, maybe mid-50s, with silver hair and the kind of face that had seen everything and been impressed by nothing. He looked directly at the camera and smiled. That's Draven, Dario said quietly. Cassian appeared on the feed, walking out to meet them with his hands visible and empty. No guards, no backup. Just him and Draven, separated by 50 feet in a war neither of them wanted to lose. What's he doing? Marin whispered. Negotiating, Serena said, or buying time, hard to tell with Cassian. Through the monitors, Marin watched Cassian and Draven talk. No audio, just 2 men having a conversation that would decide whether people died today. Draven gestured toward the house. Cassian shook his head. Draven smiled. Then he pulled out a phone and showed Cassian something on the screen. Cassian went very, very still. What is it? Marin asked, dread crawling up her spine. What's he showing him? Serena's face had gone pale. I don't know. Cassian turned and walked back toward the house, his stride measured but his shoulders tight. Draven and his men didn't follow. They just stood there, waiting. 2 minutes later, Cassian appeared in the hallway where Marin and Serena stood. His face was a mask, but Marin could see the fury burning underneath. "What happened?" Serena demanded. Cassian didn't answer. He walked straight to Marin, grabbed her hand, and pulled her into a side room, closing the door behind them. "We have a problem," he said flatly. "Another one?" "Draven has surveillance footage from your clinic the night I came in." Cassian's voice was tight, controlled, vibrating with suppressed rage. "He has video of you treating my gunshot wound, which means he has proof you're not just some innocent bystander. You're an accomplice." Marin felt the floor drop out from under her. "How?" "He must have had someone place a camera after his men reported back. Or before. I don't know." Cassian's hands clenched into fists. "But he's using it as leverage. He says if I don't hand you over in the next hour, he sends the footage to the FBI, turns you into a federal accessory to organized crime." "I didn't know you were a criminal when I treated you." "Doesn't matter. The law doesn't care about intent when it comes to aiding and abetting. You'd be arrested, charged, probably convicted." His voice dropped. "Your life would be over either way." Marin's legs went weak. She grabbed the edge of a desk for support, her mind reeling. "So what do I do?" she whispered. Cassian looked at her, and the expression on his face was something she'd never seen before, raw, desperate, and completely human. "I don't know," he said, "and that terrifies me." Before Marin could respond, the door opened and Dario stuck his head in. "Cassian, you need to see this, now." They followed him back to the monitors. One screen showed Draven's men setting up what looked like a laptop on the hood of their SUV. Another screen showed Marin's breath caught, her clinic. Live feed from inside her clinic, showing the exam room where she'd stitched Cassian back together. The angle was wrong, too high, which meant the camera was hidden somewhere she'd never thought to look. "He's live streaming it," Ivan said grimly. "To us, to show he has the footage and he's willing to use it." On the screen, the recording rewound. Marin watched herself open the clinic door, watched Cassian stumble through, watched her own hands work to save his life. The video quality was good, too good, clear enough to identify both of them, clear enough to hold up in court. "How long has he had this?" Serena asked. "Doesn't matter," Cassian said. "He has it now, and he's giving us an hour to decide." "Decide what?" Marin's voice sounded distant to her own ears. Cassian turned to look at her, and in his eyes she saw something that made her want to run. "Whether I trade you for the footage or let him destroy your life from a distance. There has to be another option." "There isn't. Draven's boxed us in. If I refuse, you go to prison. If I comply, he kills you the second he has you." Cassian's voice was hollow. "Either way, I lose you." The words hung in the air, too honest and too raw. Marin stared at the monitors at her clinic, at the evidence of her own compassion being turned into a weapon. This was it. The point where everything broke, and there was no coming back. "Then we don't choose either option," she said quietly. Everyone turned to look at her. "What do you mean?" Cassian asked. Marin met his eyes and felt something cold and sharp settle into her chest. "You said Draven wants me as leverage, to make you do something stupid." "Yes. So let him think he's winning. Let him think you're desperate enough to make a trade. Marin, and when he gets close, when he thinks he has what he wants." She paused, barely believing the words coming out of her mouth. "We take him out." The room went silent. Serena started to smile, slow and dangerous. "You want to ambush him." "I want to survive," Marin said. "And if that means playing bait to lure a killer into the open, then that's what I'll do." "No!" Cassian's voice was flat, absolute. "Absolutely not. It's my choice." "Like hell it is. I'm not using you as bait." "You already did." Marin's voice rose, all the fear and anger of the last 3 days crystallizing into something hard. "You used my clinic, you used my compassion, you used my life to cover your tracks. So now I'm using myself. On my terms. To end this. You could die. I could die anyway. At least this way I'm choosing how." They stared at each other across the room. the weight of impossible choices pressing down on both of them. "I won't let you do this," Cassian said, his voice breaking on the edges. "You don't have a choice. Neither of us do anymore." Marin's hands were shaking, but her voice stayed steady. "Draven wins if we do nothing. He wins if we run. The only way we survive is if we make him think he's won, and then we take everything away from him." Dario cleared his throat. "For what it's worth, the strategy's sound. If we control the environment, set the terms, we could make it work." "No one asked you," Cassian bit out. "Well, I'm telling you anyway. Dr. Vale's right. We're out of good options. This is the least terrible one." Serena walked over to Marin, studying her with those sharp gray eyes that saw everything. "You understand what you're volunteering for? If this goes wrong, Draven won't kill you quickly. He'll make you suffer to punish Cassian." "I understand." "And you're willing to risk that?" Marin thought about her clinic, her quiet life, the future she'd built from nothing. She thought about the lies she'd told to Draven's men, the blood on her floor, the choices that had led her to this moment. She thought about Cassian looking at her like she was worth protecting, even when it cost him everything. "Yes," she said, "I'm willing." Serena nodded once. "Then let's make a plan." The next 45 minutes were a blur of tactical discussions Marin half understood, and preparations she tried not to think about too hard. They would set up an exchange point halfway between the house and the outer gate. Open ground, clear sight lines, nowhere for Draven's men to hide. Cassian would offer the trade. Marin for the surveillance footage and safe passage. And when Draven got close enough, convinced he'd won, they'd take him down. It was insane, suicidal, the kind of plan that only worked in movies. But it was all they had. Marin stood in the hallway wearing her too big bulletproof vest, her hands clenched into fists, while Dario fitted her with a wire so thin she could barely feel it against her skin. "If things go sideways, you hit the ground and stay there," Dario said. "Don't try to run. Don't try to help. Just make yourself small and let us handle it." "Okay, I'm serious, Dr. Vale. You're the asset we're protecting. That means staying alive, not playing hero." "I understand." Cassian appeared in the doorway, his face carved from stone. 5 minutes. Draven's moving to the exchange point." Dario nodded and stepped away, leaving Marin alone with Cassian. They stood there in the hallway, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down between them. "I need you to promise me something," Cassian said quietly. "What? If this goes wrong, if Draven gets past us, you run." His voice was raw, stripped of all pretense. "You take Atlas, and you run as far and as fast as you can, and you don't look back. Promise me." "Cassian, promise me, Marin. Please." She looked at him, this man who'd bled on her floor and lied to her face and somehow become the only thing standing between her and oblivion, and felt her throat go tight. "I promise," she whispered. He stepped closer, close enough that she could see the fear in his eyes, the guilt, the desperate hope that maybe they'd both survive this. "If we make it through this," Cassian said, "I'm going to kiss you. And it's not going to be gentle or polite or anything a civilian deserves. It's going to be desperate and messy and probably a terrible idea. But I'm doing it anyway." Despite everything, Marin felt her mouth twitch. "That's the worst pre-battle speech I've ever heard. It's the only one I have." "Then I guess I'll have to survive to hold you to it." Something flickered in his expression. Hope, maybe, or fear. He reached out and touched her face, his fingers gentle against her cheek. "Don't die," he said. "Same to you." Dario appeared again. "It's time." They walked out together, Cassian, Marin, Dario, and a half-dozen guards with rifles. Atlas stayed behind, locked in Marin's room despite his howling protests. She couldn't risk him getting caught in the crossfire. The afternoon sun was bright and merciless, turning everything sharp and clear. Draven's men waited at the exchange point, spread out in a loose perimeter. And in the center stood Nikolai Draven himself, holding a tablet and smiling like he'd already won. "Dr. Vale," he called out, his voice carrying across the open ground. "How kind of you to join us." Marin's heart was trying to beat its way out of her chest, but she kept her face neutral and walked forward. Cassian stayed 3 steps behind, his hand resting on the gun at his hip. "You have something that belongs to me," Draven continued, gesturing to Cassian. "And I have something that could ruin your life. Seems like a fair trade, doesn't it? Nothing about this is fair, Marin said, her voice steadier than she felt. True, but fairness is subjective. Draven held up the tablet showing the frozen image of Marin treating Cassian's wound. This footage goes to federal authorities in... He checked his watch. 12 minutes. Unless, of course, we come to an arrangement. What kind of arrangement? Simple. You come with me. Cassian backs off, and everyone walks away alive. Draven's smile widened. Well, eventually. And if I refuse? Then you spend the next 20 years in a federal prison, wondering if saving a criminal's life was worth destroying your own. Marin looked back at Cassian. He stood frozen, every muscle locked tight, his eyes locked on her with an intensity that felt like a physical touch. This was it. The moment where everything either fell into place or collapsed completely. Marin took a step forward, then another. Draven's smile grew triumphant. His men shifted, relaxing slightly, convinced the veterinarian was about to surrender. That's when Marin saw it, a glint of metal in the trees to Draven's left. A scope. A sniper who'd positioned himself while everyone watched the exchange. Not one of Cassian's men, one of Draven's, aimed directly at Cassian's head. Get down! Marin screamed, throwing herself sideways. The shot cracked through the air, loud enough to shatter the world. Cassian dropped, but Marin couldn't tell if he'd moved fast enough. Chaos erupted. Gunfire from 3 directions, men shouting. Draven's tablet shattering as he dove for cover behind his SUV. Marin hit the ground hard, the breath knocked out of her lungs, her ears ringing. Someone grabbed her arm and dragged her backward. Dario, his face grim, hauling her toward the house while bullets tore up the ground around them. She looked back and saw Cassian on his feet, firing methodically at Draven's men, his face a mask of cold fury. Then she saw the blood, dark stain spreading across his white shirt, high on the chest. The sniper had hit him. Cassian! Marin screamed, fighting against Dario's grip. He's fine, move! But he wasn't fine. She'd seen enough gunshot wounds to know when one was fatal, and the way Cassian was moving, stiff, favoring his right side, his face going pale, meant he was hit bad. Dario got her to the house, shoved her through the door, and immediately turned back to join the fight. Marin stood in the entryway, shaking, watching through the windows as Cassian's men and Draven's men tore each other apart. This wasn't an exchange. It was an execution. And Draven had planned it from the beginning. The gunfire stopped as suddenly as it started. Marin saw Draven's men retreating, dragging their wounded, leaving 3 bodies on the ground. Cassian's team held the perimeter, but the cost was written in blood and screaming. Then she saw Cassian collapse. Marin ran. She made it outside before anyone could stop her, sliding to her knees beside Cassian where he'd fallen. His shirt was soaked through, blood pooling beneath him, his breathing shallow and ragged. You absolute idiot, Marin said, her hands already moving to assess the damage. Entry wound high on the right side, maybe 2 inches below the collarbone, close to the subclavian artery. If the bullet had nicked it, he'd bleed out in minutes. Told you. Not to play hero, Cassian managed, his voice thin. Shut up. Don't talk. Marin pressed both hands against the wound, trying to slow the bleeding. Her veterinary training screamed that this was wrong. This was a person, not an animal. She didn't have the right equipment, or the right skills, or the right... Marin. Cassian's hand found hers, sticky with blood. The tablet. Did Draven take it? I don't know. I don't care. You should. He coughed and blood flecked his lips. If he has the footage, you're still in danger. I don't give a damn about the footage. I care about keeping you alive. Dario appeared beside her, a proper medical kit in his hands. Our doctor's on the way, 2 minutes out. He doesn't have 2 minutes, Marin said, her voice breaking. He's bleeding too fast. She worked anyway, packing the wound with gauze, applying pressure that made Cassian's whole body go rigid with pain. She could feel his pulse under her fingers, rapid and thready, his life draining away despite everything she was doing. Stay with me, Marin said fiercely. You don't get to die, not after dragging me into this mess. Not after promising to kiss me. You stay right here, and you fight. Cassian's eyes focused on her face, and he smiled, actually smiled, blood on his teeth, and death creeping in at the edges. Bossy, he whispered. Damn right I am. Now shut up and breathe. The doctor arrived in a blur of motion, taking over with professional efficiency that made Marin feel helpless and useless. They got Cassian onto a stretcher, carried him into the house, disappeared into a room that had been converted into a surgical suite. And Marin was left standing in the yard, covered in his blood, watching the door close between them. Serena appeared beside her, her face pale beneath the composed mask. "He'll survive," Serena said. "He's survived worse." "Has he?" "No." Serena's voice was hollow. "But I'm trying to convince myself anyway." They stood there together, two women watching the door and waiting to see if the man they both loved, in very different ways, would make it through. An hour passed, then two. Finally the door opened and the doctor emerged, his scrubs stained red, his face exhausted. "He's stable," the doctor said. "Bullet missed the major vessels, but it collapsed his lung and fractured a rib. He'll need weeks to recover, maybe months, but he'll live." Marin's legs gave out. She sat down hard on the floor, her hands shaking, tears streaming down her face. He was alive. They'd both survived. But outside, somewhere in the mountains, Nikolai Draven was still breathing, still planning, still holding the footage that could destroy her. And Marin knew with cold certainty that this wasn't over. It was just beginning. Marin sat in a chair outside Cassian's recovery room for 3 hours before Serena physically dragged her away. Her hands were still crusted with his blood, dark and brown now, dried into the creases of her palms and under her fingernails. She'd tried to wash it off twice, but it clung to her skin like an accusation. "You need to sleep," Serena said, her voice cutting through Marin's fog. "I need to make sure he's alive." "He's alive. The doctor said so. Sitting here staring at a door won't change anything." Marin looked up at Serena, this woman who shared Cassian's gray eyes and sharp edges, and saw something unexpected in her face. Not hostility, not suspicion, just exhaustion that mirrored Marin's own. "You should hate me," Marin said quietly. "Victor was right. I'm a liability that's going to get your brother killed." "Victor's a paranoid bastard who sees threats in his own shadow." Serena pulled up another chair and sat, her posture perfect despite the bloodstains on her designer clothes. "And you're not a liability. You're the reason Cassian's still breathing." "I'm the reason he got shot in the first place." "No. Draven's the reason, and the mole who fed him information about our security, and Cassian's own stubborn refusal to let you leave when he should have." Serena's smile was bitter. "There's plenty of blame to spread around, Dr. Vale. Don't hoard it all for yourself." "That's very generous of you." "I'm not generous. I'm practical." Serena leaned back, studying Marin with those calculating eyes. "My brother's been running the syndicate since he was 23. 12 years of making impossible decisions, watching people die, turning himself into something hard enough to survive this world. And in all that time, I've never seen him look at anyone the way he looks at you." Marin's throat went tight. "He barely knows me. He knows enough. Knows you saved his life when you could have turned him away. Knows you lied to Draven's men to protect him. Knows you volunteered to be bait in an ambush that could have gotten you killed." Serena's voice softened slightly. "That's more than most people in our world would do. Hell, it's more than some of his own people have done." "The mole," Marin said, the pieces clicking together. "You still don't know who it is." "No. But we will." Something dangerous flickered across Serena's face. "And when we do, they'll wish Draven had gotten to them first." The recovery room door opened and the doctor emerged, pulling off blood-stained gloves. Both women stood immediately. "He's asking for you," the doctor said to Marin, "and he won't settle down until he sees you. 5 minutes, no more. He needs rest." Marin followed the doctor into the room, her heart hammering. The space had been set up like a proper hospital room. Monitors beeping steadily, IV drip running clear fluids into Cassian's arm, the sharp smell of antiseptic hanging in the air. Cassian lay propped up on pillows, his chest wrapped in bandages, his face pale but conscious. His eyes tracked to her the second she entered. "You're still here," he said, his voice rough. "Where else would I be?" "Safe? Far away from me." Marin pulled a chair to his bedside and sat, her hands folded in her lap to keep them from shaking. "We tried that. Didn't work out so well." "Marin, don't. Don't you dare tell me I should leave now." Her voice came out harder than she intended. "You took a bullet protecting me. You collapsed in my arms. You don't get to push me away because you think it's noble." Cassian's mouth twitched, and he winced. Laughing hurts. Then don't laugh, just listen. Marin leaned forward, holding his gaze. Draven's still out there. He still has the footage. And he just proved he's willing to kill you to get to me. So we need a plan. A real one. Not some half-baked ambush that nearly got you killed. Already working on it. While you're lying in bed with a collapsed lung? Delegation. It's a beautiful thing. He shifted slightly, grimacing. Dario's tracking Draven's movements. Ivan's working on identifying the mole. Serena's coordinating with our allies to cut off Draven's supply lines. And I'm lying here trying not to bleed on expensive sheets. Despite everything, Marin felt her mouth twitch. You're insane. Probably. His hand moved on the bed, fingers stretching toward hers. An invitation, not a demand. Marin took his hand, feeling the warmth of his skin against hers, the steady pulse at his wrist. I thought you were going to die, she said quietly. Out there on the ground. I felt you bleeding out under my hands and I couldn't stop it. But you tried. That's what matters. It's not enough. It was for me. Cassian's fingers tightened around hers. You stayed. You fought. You screamed at me to keep breathing when I wanted to give up. That's not nothing, Marin. It felt like nothing when you collapsed. Well, I'm still here. Stubborn, remember? The monitor beside the bed beeped steadily, marking time, marking life. Marin watched Cassian's chest rise and fall, cataloging each breath like proof he was real. What happens now? She asked. Now we finish this. Properly. His voice took on an edge that was pure steel. Draven thinks he won. Thinks he broke us. We're going to show him exactly how wrong he is. How? By taking everything he has. His operation, his reputation, his freedom. Cassian's eyes were hard. And then we're going to make sure he can never threaten you again. You're talking about killing him. I'm talking about survival, his or ours, and I choose ours. The doctor appeared in the doorway, tapping his watch meaningfully. Marin stood, reluctant to let go of Cassian's hand. Rest, she said. Heal. Don't make me patch you up again. Yes, ma'am. She was halfway to the door when Cassian called her name. Marin turned back. That kiss I promised you, Cassian said, his voice rough. It's still happening, soon as I can stand without passing out. That's the worst pillow talk I've ever heard. It's the only pillow talk I have. Marin left him smiling and walked back into the hallway where Serena waited with crossed arms and knowing eyes. 5 minutes turned into 10, Serena observed. Sue me. I'd rather put you to work. Serena gestured for Marin to follow. If you're staying, and clearly you are, you might as well be useful. They walked through the fortress to what Serena called the operations room, a space filled with computers, maps, and enough surveillance equipment to run a small intelligence agency. Dario stood at the center of it all, coordinating with people on 3 different phones while screens around him showed everything from traffic cameras to satellite imagery. Status, Serena said. Dario held up one finger, finished a conversation in rapid Russian, and turned to face them. Draven's gone to ground. Last confirmed sighting was 6 hours ago at a warehouse near the docks. He's consolidating his people, probably planning his next move. What about the footage? Marin asked. Still has it. We intercepted some communications. He's planning to use it as insurance. If we come after him, it goes to the feds. If he disappears, same thing. He's locked it down tight. Marin felt her stomach drop. So I'm screwed either way. Not necessarily. Dario pulled up a new screen showing what looked like financial records. Draven keeps all his critical data in one place, a secure server at his main compound. If we can access that server, we can delete the footage before he has a chance to use it. Let me guess, Serena said. The compound is a fortress. Worse, it's a converted industrial complex with 3 layers of security, armed guards 24/7, and enough firepower to hold off a small army. Dario's expression was grim. We'd need a full tactical team, detailed intel on their security protocols, and about a week to plan properly. We don't have a week, Marin said. No, we don't. Dario looked at Serena. Which is why we're going to need to get creative. The planning session went on for hours. dissolving into arguments about approach vectors and extraction routes and things Marin barely understood. She sat at the edge of the room, listening to them discuss violence with the same clinical precision she used to discuss surgical procedures, and felt the weight of her old life slipping further away with every passing minute. This was who she was now. Not a veterinarian, not a civilian, someone who sat in war rooms and planned raids because the alternative was prison or death. Around midnight, Dario called for a break. Serena disappeared to check on Cassian. The tactical team dispersed to prep equipment, and Marin found herself alone with Dario in the operations room, staring at satellite images of Draven's compound. "You don't have to do this," Dario said quietly. Marin looked up at him. "Do what?" "Any of it. We can get you out. New identity, new city, enough money to start over. You could walk away from all this." "With federal charges hanging over my head and Draven hunting me for the rest of my life?" "We'd handle Draven, eventually." "Eventually's not good enough." Marin stood, moving closer to the screens. "And running doesn't solve anything. I tried that already. Didn't work." "You didn't try. Cassian wouldn't let you. Same result." She traced a finger over the image of the compound, counting guard positions. "How many people would you lose trying to get that footage?" Dario was quiet for a moment. "Honestly, could be none. Could be a dozen. Depends on how fast their response team mobilizes. Those are terrible odds." "Welcome to our world." Marin looked at him. This man who'd dragged her to safety during the ambush, who'd fitted her with a wire and told her to stay small. "Why are you helping me?" "You don't know me. Don't owe me anything." "Cassian trusts you. That's enough." Dario's expression softened slightly. "And between you and me, I've never seen him like this. He's always been controlled, calculating, 3 steps ahead. But with you, he's just present, human. It's good for him. Even if it gets him killed. He was dying anyway, just slower. This way, at least, he's fighting for something that matters." The words hit harder than Marin expected. She turned back to the screens, blinking against the sudden burn in her eyes. "When do we move?" she asked. 48 hours. Soon as Cassian can stand without medical intervention." Dario pulled up a tactical map. "But there's something you should know. Draven's not stupid. He'll be expecting retaliation, which means he'll have extra security, maybe even mercenaries. This isn't going to be clean." "Nothing about this has been clean." "True, but this is different. This is us walking into his territory, outnumbered and outgunned, banking on speed and surprise. One mistake and we all die. You included." Marin met his eyes. "Then we don't make mistakes." Dario smiled, sharp and dangerous. "You're starting to sound like one of us. God help me." The next 2 days were a blur of preparation and waiting. Cassian recovered with the kind of stubborn determination that made the doctor threaten to sedate him. Serena ran the syndicate's operations with ruthless efficiency, cutting off Draven's allies one by one until he was isolated and desperate. And Marin learned to field strip a handgun, practiced her stance at the firing range in the basement, and tried very hard not to think about the fact that she might have to actually shoot someone. Atlas stayed close, sensing her anxiety, his solid presence a reminder that some things in her life were still real and uncomplicated. On the morning of the raid, Marin stood in front of the mirror in her room, staring at the woman reflected back. Tactical vest, dark clothes, her hair pulled back tight. She looked like someone from a movie, someone dangerous, someone she didn't recognize. A knock at the door pulled her back. Cassian stood in the hallway, dressed in similar gear, his left arm still favoring his injury, but his face set with determination. "You ready?" he asked. "No." "Good. Only idiots go into combat feeling ready." He stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk. If this is another speech about how I should stay behind, it's not." Cassian moved closer, and Marin could see the exhaustion in his face, the pain he was hiding. "It's about what happens if this goes wrong." "It won't." "It might. And if it does, if I don't make it out, I need you to know something." He paused, jaw working like the words were physically difficult. "You saved my life. Not just that first night in your clinic, every day since. You made me remember what it felt like to care about something other than survival and territory and the next threat on the horizon." Marin's throat went tight. "Cassian, Let me finish. His hand came up, cupping her face with a gentleness that didn't match the violence they were about to walk into. If I die today, I die knowing I met someone who chose compassion when she could have chosen safety. Someone who looked at the worst parts of my world and didn't run. That's worth something. That's worth everything. You're not going to die. Probably not. But if I do, I wanted you to know. Marin grabbed the front of his vest, pulling him close enough that she could feel his breath on her face. You promised me a kiss, Cassian Rook, and I'm holding you to it, so you better make it through this. His mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. Yes, ma'am. They stood there for a moment, inches apart, the weight of everything unsaid pressing down between them. Then Cassian stepped back, professional distance sliding back into place. Convoy leaves in 10 minutes. Dario's got your position. He left, and Marin stood alone in her room, her hands shaking, her heart racing. This was it. The point where everything either worked or fell apart completely. She grabbed her jacket, checked the gun Dario had given her one more time, and walked out to meet whatever came next. The convoy consisted of 3 vehicles, armored SUVs with tinted windows and enough firepower to start a small war. Marin rode in the second vehicle with Dario and 2 tactical team members she'd been introduced to, but whose names she'd immediately forgotten. Cassian rode in the lead vehicle with Serena. The third carried backup and medical supplies. They drove through the darkness, headlights cutting through the pre-dawn fog. Nobody talked. The tension in the vehicle was thick enough to choke on. 45 minutes later, they pulled off the main road onto a service route that led to the industrial district. Warehouses loomed on either side, dark and abandoned. Draven's compound sat at the center of this dead zone, a converted factory surrounded by chain-link fence and razor wire. Dario pulled out a tablet showing the compound's layout. Security team identified 3 entry points. We're hitting the east entrance. Lowest guard concentration, direct access to the server room. Serena's team takes the north entrance as a distraction. Cassian's team breaches the main building and secures the footage. What's my job? Marin asked. Stay with me. Don't shoot unless I tell you to. And if things go sideways, you run for the extraction point and don't look back. That's a terrible plan. It's the best one we have. The vehicle stopped 2 blocks from the compound. Everyone climbed out, weapons checked, comm units activated. Marin's hands were slick with sweat inside her gloves. Cassian appeared beside her, his face shadowed in the dim light. You stick with Dario. You follow his orders. You don't be a hero. I'm not a hero. I'm a veterinarian who's lost her mind. Close enough. He touched her shoulder, brief and warm. See you on the other side. Then he was gone, disappearing into the darkness with his team. Dario gestured for Marin to follow. They moved through the shadows between warehouses, staying low, staying quiet. 2 tactical team members flanked them, rifles up, scanning for threats. The east fence appeared ahead, topped with razor wire that gleamed in the security lights. One of the tactical guys pulled out wire cutters and made quick work of a section, peeling it back to create an opening. They slipped through one by one. The compound was massive up close, 3-story industrial buildings connected by walkways, rusted metal and broken windows. Marin could see guard patrols moving on the upper levels, their silhouettes visible against the light pollution from the city beyond. Dario held up a fist. Everyone stopped. Voices ahead. 2 guards rounding the corner, automatic weapons slung over their shoulders, talking in low Russian. The tactical team moved with terrifying efficiency. Silent approach, quick takedown, bodies dragged into the shadows before they could make a sound. Marin watched with her heart in her throat, unable to look away. Clear, one of the team members whispered into his comm. They kept moving. The server room was in the basement of the main building, accessed through a maintenance entrance half hidden behind stacked pallets. Dario checked his tablet, confirming the location, then nodded to the door. One of the tactical guys produced a small device, attached it to the lock, and stepped back. 5 seconds later, the lock clicked open. They were in. The basement was dark, lit only by emergency lighting that cast everything in sickly green. Marin could hear the hum of servers somewhere ahead, the mechanical breathing of cooling systems. Dario led them through a maze of corridors, following the schematic on his tablet. Left turn, right turn, down a narrow stairwell that smelled like mold and rust. Then they were standing in front of a reinforced door marked Server Room, authorized personnel only. This is it, Dario said quietly. He gestured to one of the team members. How long to crack it? 3 minutes, maybe 4. Make it 2. The man went to work while Marin and the others kept watch. The corridor was empty, silent except for the distant hum of machinery. But Marin's instincts were screaming that something was wrong. It was too easy, too quiet. Dario, she whispered, this doesn't feel right. I know, but we're committed now. The lock clicked. The door swung open, revealing a room full of server racks, blinking lights, and enough processing power to run a small tech company. And standing in the center of it all, smiling like he'd been waiting for them, was Nikolai Draven. Dr. Vale, he said pleasantly, how kind of you to deliver yourself to me. Marin's blood turned to ice. Behind Draven, a dozen armed men stepped out of the shadows, weapons raised, surrounding them completely. They'd walked straight into a trap. Dario's hand moved toward his gun, but Draven made a clicking sound with his tongue. I wouldn't. My men have orders to shoot the good doctor first if anyone makes a move, and that would be such a waste. Draven's eyes locked on Marin, cold and calculating. You've been quite the inconvenience, you know, but also quite valuable. Cassian Rook doesn't care about much in this world, but he cares about you, which makes you the perfect leverage. Where's Cassian? Marin demanded, her voice shaking. Walking into his own trap upstairs. I have teams waiting for him on every level. He'll be dead or captured within the hour. Draven gestured, and 2 of his men grabbed Marin's arms, yanking her forward. And you, Dr. Vale, are going to help me make sure he doesn't do anything stupid in his final moments. Dario lunged, but gunfire erupted, deafening in the enclosed space. One of the tactical team members went down, blood spraying. The other raised his hands, weapon dropping to the floor. No! Marin screamed, fighting against the hands holding her. Enough! Draven's voice cut through the chaos. You're alive because I want you alive. That can change very quickly if you don't cooperate. Marin went still, her heart hammering, her mind racing. Cassian was walking into an ambush. Dario and the team were captured, and she was about to be used as bait to destroy the man who'd tried to save her. Draven pulled out a phone, pressed a button, and held it up so Marin could see the screen. Live video feed. Cassian moving through the upper levels of the compound with Serena and their team, unaware they were being herded into a kill zone. Call him, Draven said. Tell him to surrender. Tell him you'll die if he doesn't. Go to hell. Brave, but stupid. Draven nodded to one of his men, who immediately grabbed Dario and pressed a gun to his head. Call him, or I execute your friend right here. Marin looked at Dario, saw him mouth the word don't, saw the acceptance in his eyes. I'm sorry, Marin whispered. Then she grabbed the phone from Draven's hand and screamed into it with everything she had. Cassian, it's a trap! Get out! Get... Pain exploded across the side of her head as someone hit her, hard enough to drop her to her knees. The phone clattered to the floor. Draven picked it up calmly, ending the call. Well, he said, that was disappointing, but effective. He heard you, which means he knows you're here, which means he'll come for you. Draven crouched down in front of Marin, grabbing her chin and forcing her to look at him. And when he does, I'll kill him in front of you, slowly. And then I'll decide whether you're worth keeping or just another loose end to clean up. Marin spit blood at his feet. You're going to die tonight. Probably not. Draven stood, brushing off his hands like he'd touched something dirty. Take her upstairs, the executive office. Make sure Rook knows where to find her. They dragged Marin out of the server room, through corridors that blurred together, upstairs that made her ribs ache. She could hear gunfire in the distance now, sporadic, controlled. Cassian fighting his way through Draven's men, coming for her, walking into exactly the trap Draven had set. The executive office was on the top floor, all windows and exposed sightlines. They threw Marin into a chair and zip-tied her wrists behind her back, the plastic cutting into her skin. Draven's men took up positions around the room, weapons trained on the door. And they waited. 5 minutes passed. 10. The gunfire grew closer, more intense. Then it stopped. Silence fell over the compound, thick and terrible. The office door burst open and Cassian appeared, gun raised, his face streaked with blood and soot. He swept the room, saw Marin, and his expression went from tactical to devastated in a heartbeat. Let her go, Draven. Draven stepped out from behind a pillar, gun aimed at Marin's head. Drop your weapon first. Not a chance. Then I pull this trigger and Dr. Vale's brains redecorate my office. Your choice, Rook. Cassian's hands tightened on his gun. Marin could see the calculation happening behind his eyes, the impossible math of how to save her without getting them both killed. Don't, Marin said. Cassian, don't you dare! Quiet, Draven snapped. He's going to kill us both anyway. Don't give him the satisfaction. I said quiet. Draven's hand moved, pistol whipping Marin hard enough to snap her head sideways. Blood filled her mouth. Cassian's gun came up, aimed directly at Draven's head. Touch her again, and you die. Bold words for a man surrounded by my people. Your people are dead. Serena's team took them out level by level. It's just you and me now, Draven, so let's settle this. For the first time, uncertainty flickered across Draven's face. He glanced at his men, saw them shifting nervously, weapons wavering. You're bluffing, Draven said. Am I? Cassian's voice was cold, absolute. Check your comms, call your teams, see who answers. Draven pressed his comm unit. Static. He tried again. More static. Then Serena's voice cut through, sharp and satisfied. Looking for your men, Draven? They're indisposed. Permanently. Draven's composure cracked. His gun swung toward Cassian, finger tightening on the trigger. Marin didn't think. She just moved. She threw her weight sideways, tipping the chair, falling hard. The movement pulled Draven's aim off-center just as he fired. The shot went wide. Cassian didn't. 3 shots, precise and controlled. Draven staggered backward, blood blooming across his chest, his gun clattering to the floor. His men raised their weapons, but the door behind Cassian exploded inward. Serena and her team poured through, and the office became a war zone. Marin hit the ground hard, her hand still zip-tied, glass shattering around her as bullets tore through windows. She curled into a ball, trying to make herself small, trying to survive. Then Cassian was there, covering her body with his own, shielding her from the chaos. I've got you, he said, his voice rough in her ear. I've got you. The gunfire stopped as abruptly as it started. Cassian cut through Marin's zip ties with a knife, helped her sit up. She was shaking, her wrists bleeding, her head ringing. But she was alive. They were both alive. Draven lay on the floor 10 feet away, still breathing but barely, blood pooling beneath him. Serena stood over him, gun pointed at his head, her face carved from ice. The footage, Cassian said. Draven laughed, wet and painful. Server, encrypted. You'll never get it. We don't need to get it. Dario appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand, blood streaming from a cut above his eye. We just need to destroy it, and I've got override codes from one of your tech guys. Very cooperative once we explained the situation. Draven's eyes went wide. No, wipe it, Cassian said. Dario's fingers moved over the tablet. Wiping now. 30 seconds. You bastard. Draven tried to sit up, failed, collapsed back to the floor. Should have taken the deal, Cassian said. Should have walked away when you had the chance. This isn't over. Yes, it is. The tablet beeped. Dario looked up, his expression grim with satisfaction. Footage is gone. All backups wiped. Dr. Vale's clear. Marin felt something break open in her chest. Relief so intense it felt like drowning. She'd spent days running from federal charges, from Draven's threats, from the evidence that could destroy her life. And now it was gone. Serena pressed her gun to Draven's forehead. Any last words? Draven looked past her, directly at Marin. You think you've won? You think this is over? He coughed, blood on his teeth. I'm not the only one who knows about you. The Syndicate has enemies. They'll come. Let them come, Cassian said quietly. We'll be ready. Serena pulled the trigger. The office fell silent except for the ringing in Marin's ears and the sound of her own ragged breathing. It was over. Draven was dead. The footage was destroyed. The nightmare that had started with a pounding on her clinic door had finally, brutally, ended. Cassian helped Marin to her feet, his hands gentle despite the violence still hanging in the air. She looked around the office, bodies on the floor, bullet holes in the walls, the smell of gunpowder and blood thick enough to taste. "We need to go," Serena said. "Police will be here soon. We've got maybe 10 minutes." They moved fast, extracting through the same route they'd entered. The compound was eerily quiet now, just bodies and shadows. Draven's entire operation, decimated in under an hour. Maren climbed into the SUV on legs that barely worked, Cassian beside her, Dario driving. They pulled away just as sirens began wailing in the distance. Nobody spoke during the ride back. Maren sat with her head against the window, watching the city blur past, trying to process the fact that she'd just witnessed multiple murders and felt nothing but relief. What did that make her? When they arrived back at the fortress, medical teams were waiting. They tried to take Maren to be examined, but she pushed past them, walking on autopilot to her room. Atlas was there, immediately pressing against her legs, whining. Maren collapsed on the bed, buried her face in his fur, and finally let herself cry. She didn't know how long she'd been there when the knock came. She didn't answer, but the door opened anyway. Cassian stepped inside, moving carefully, his face cleaned of blood but exhaustion carved into every line. "You should be resting," Maren said, her voice muffled against Atlas's side. "So should you." "I can't. Every time I close my eyes, I see—" She trailed off, unable to finish. Cassian sat on the edge of the bed, not touching her but close enough that she could feel his presence. "It doesn't get easier. The first time you watch someone die. Or the 10th time. It just becomes part of you. I don't want it to be part of me. I know, but it is now. And you can either let it destroy you, or you can decide what kind of person you want to be in spite of it." Maren finally looked up at him, her eyes red and swollen. "What kind of person are you? The kind who kills to protect what matters. The kind who sleeps with one eye open and trusts almost no one." He paused. "The kind who met a veterinarian who should have turned him away and didn't, and it changed everything." "I didn't change anything. You changed me." His hand moved, carefully brushing a strand of hair from her face. "I told you I'd kiss you when this was over, and it's over, Maren. Draven's dead. The footage is gone. You're free." "I don't feel free." "Give it time." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they'd survived pressing down between them. Then Maren moved, closing the distance, her mouth finding his with desperate hunger. The kiss was nothing like she'd imagined, not gentle or romantic or any of the things kisses were supposed to be. It was rough and desperate and tasted like blood, and fear and survival. It was Cassian's hand in her hair, her fingers clutching his shirt, both of them clinging to proof they were alive. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cassian rested his forehead against hers. "That was a terrible idea," he said. "Probably. We should stop." "Probably." Neither of them moved. "The next one's your choice," Cassian said quietly. "If you want me to leave, I will. If you want me to stay, I stay. But it has to be your choice, Maren. Not fear, not adrenaline, not gratitude for keeping you alive. Your choice." Maren pulled back enough to look at him, this man who'd bled on her floor and turned her life upside down and somehow become the only solid thing in a world gone mad. "Stay," she said. "You sure?" "No, but I'm choosing it anyway." His mouth curved into something that was almost a smile. "Good enough for me." He kissed her again, slower this time, like they had all the time in the world. Like they weren't both covered in other people's blood, hiding in a fortress, running from consequences they'd barely survived. For one fragile night, Maren let herself believe the worst was behind them. She should have known better. Maren woke to sunlight streaming through unfamiliar windows and the warmth of another body beside her. For one disoriented moment, she couldn't remember where she was or how she'd gotten there. Then it all came flooding back. The raid, Draven's blood pooling on the floor, the kiss that had turned into something more desperate and necessary than either of them had planned. She turned her head carefully, not wanting to wake Cassian. He was still asleep, his face relaxed in a way she'd never seen before, the hard edges softened by unconsciousness. His injured shoulder was carefully positioned away from her, bandages visible above the sheet. He looked almost peaceful, almost human. Maren slipped out of bed as quietly as she could, grabbed her clothes from where they'd been discarded on the floor, and moved to the bathroom. In the mirror, a stranger stared back, bruises darkening on her temple where Draven had hit her, cuts on her wrists from the zip ties, exhaustion carved into every line of her face. She looked like she'd been through a war, because she had. She showered until the water ran cold, scrubbing away dried blood and the lingering smell of gunpowder, trying to wash off the memory of watching a man die and feeling nothing but relief. When she finally emerged, wrapped in a towel, Cassian was awake and sitting on the edge of the bed, staring at his hands. "Morning?" Marin said carefully. He looked up, and the vulnerability she'd seen in his sleeping face was gone, replaced by something guarded. "Morning. How are you feeling?" "Like I got hit by a truck, and then the truck backed up and hit me again." She moved to her bag, pulling out clean clothes. "You?" "About the same." He stood, wincing as his shoulder protested. "We need to talk." Marin's stomach dropped. Nothing good ever started with those words. "About what?" "About last night. About what happens next." Cassian ran a hand through his hair, a rare gesture of uncertainty. "About whether you actually want to be here, or if you were just trying to feel alive after almost dying." The accusation stung because part of it was true. Marin had kissed him in the aftermath of violence, seeking proof of survival, desperate for something real to anchor herself to. But it hadn't just been adrenaline. It had been the culmination of days spent watching him fight to keep her safe, seeing past the criminal to the man underneath. "I don't know what I want," Marin said honestly. "A week ago, I was a veterinarian with a quiet life. Now I'm—" She gestured helplessly at herself. "This, whatever this is, I don't even recognize myself anymore." "I know, and that's on me." Cassian's voice was rough. "I dragged you into my world, and it changed you, made you into something you never asked to be. You didn't make me do anything. I made choices, bad ones maybe, but they were mine." Marin pulled on jeans and a sweater, needing the armor of clothing. "I let you into my clinic. I lied to Draven's men. I volunteered to be bait. Those were my decisions. Made under duress. Made because I chose compassion over safety. That's who I am, Cassian. Or who I was. I'm not sure anymore." They stood on opposite sides of the room, the bed between them like a barrier, and Marin felt the weight of everything they weren't saying pressing down. "So what now?" she asked quietly. "Now you have a choice. A real one, without guns or threats or federal charges hanging over you." Cassian's hands clenched at his sides. "You can leave. Go back to your clinic, your life. I'll make sure you're protected. Security detail you'll never see. Financial support you'll never have to ask for. You'll be safe and free to pretend none of this ever happened. And the alternative? You stay. With me. In this world. Knowing exactly what that means, the danger, the violence, the fact that you'll never be able to go back to who you were before." His voice dropped. "I won't lie to you and say it'll be easy. It won't. But I'm asking anyway, because last night meant something to me. You mean something to me. And I'm selfish enough to want more, even if I shouldn't." Marin's throat went tight. She wanted to say yes immediately, to close the distance between them and choose him without hesitation. But she'd spent the last week being swept along by circumstances beyond her control, making split-second decisions to survive. This choice deserved more than impulse. "I need time," she said, "to think. To figure out who I am now and what I actually want, not what fear or adrenaline is telling me to want." Something flickered across Cassian's face, disappointment maybe, or relief that she wasn't just running. "How much time?" "I don't know. A week? A month? However long it takes to feel like myself again. And if you never do, then I'll make my choice anyway." Marin moved closer, stopping just short of touching him. "But I need you to promise me something." "What?" "That you'll let me go if that's what I choose. No protection detail I didn't ask for. No financial support that makes me feel owned. No checking in to make sure I'm safe. If I walk away, you let me walk." Cassian's jaw tightened, every instinct clearly screaming at him to refuse. But he nodded. "I promise." "Thank you." She left him standing there and went to find Atlas. The next 3 days passed in a strange limbo. Marin stayed at the fortress but kept her distance, needing space to process everything that had happened. She walked the grounds with Atlas, ate meals alone in her room, and tried to remember what her life had looked like before a bleeding stranger pounded on her clinic door. It felt like a lifetime ago. Cassian gave her the space she'd asked for, but she'd catch him watching her sometimes. From across the dining room, through windows, in hallways, they passed through without speaking. He looked like a man trying to memorize something he knew he was about to lose. On the fourth morning, Serena found Marin on the terrace, staring out at the mountains. "Planning your escape?" Serena asked, settling into a chair with the kind of elegant precision that made everything look choreographed. "Trying to figure out if I want to escape or if I'm just scared of staying. Those aren't mutually exclusive." Serena lit a cigarette, took a drag, and exhaled slowly. "You know what I think? I'm sure you're going to tell me. I think you're punishing yourself for surviving, for making hard choices and coming out the other side changed but alive. You think if you were a good person, you'd feel worse about what happened to Draven and his men." Marin's hands clenched on the railing. "I watched people die and felt nothing. What does that make me? Human. Practical. Someone who understands that some deaths make the world safer." Serena's voice was matter-of-fact. "You think my brother feels guilty every time he makes a hard call? He doesn't. He feels responsible. There's a difference. I don't want to be the kind of person who's comfortable with violence. Then you're in the wrong place. Because that's what this world is. Violence managed, violence controlled, violence used as a tool to protect what matters." Serena stubbed out her cigarette. "But that doesn't mean you can't still be compassionate. Look at what you do for a living. You spend your days saving animals most people would give up on. That's who you are, Dr. Vale. The violence doesn't erase that." "It feels like it does. Give it time. The person you were before is still in there. She's just got some new scars and a better understanding of what she's capable of when pushed." Serena stood, smoothing her skirt. "My brother's in love with you, by the way. In case you hadn't noticed." Marin's head snapped up. "What?" "He's in love with you, has been since you told Draven's men to get the hell out of your clinic. Maybe before that." Serena's smile was sharp. "He's just too stubborn to say it out loud. Thinks it'll scare you off." "I'm already scared." "Good. Fear means you're taking this seriously." Serena headed for the door, pausing at the threshold. "For what it's worth, I think you should stay. You're good for him. Make him remember he's still human underneath all the armor, but it's your choice, Dr. Vale. Just make sure it's one you can live with." She left, and Marin stood alone on the terrace, Serena's words echoing in her head. "In love with you." The thought should have terrified her. Instead, it settled into her chest like something inevitable, a truth she'd been circling around since the night Cassian had stood bleeding in her clinic and refused to go to the hospital because it would mean dying. He'd trusted her with his life before he even knew her name, and she'd trusted him with hers every day since. That evening, Marin found Cassian in his office, surrounded by paperwork and looking exhausted. He glanced up when she entered, hope and wariness warring on his face. "Can we talk?" Marin asked. "Of course." He set down his pen, giving her his full attention. Marin closed the door behind her and moved to the chair across from his desk. She'd rehearsed this conversation a dozen times in her head, but now that the moment was here, all the words felt inadequate. "I've been thinking," she started, "about what you said, about choosing to stay or choosing to leave." Cassian nodded, his expression carefully neutral. "And? And I think you were asking the wrong question." Marin leaned forward, holding his gaze. "It's not about staying in your world or going back to mine. It's about whether we can build something new, together. Something that isn't just your criminal empire or my quiet clinic, but something that belongs to both of us. What would that look like?" "I don't know yet, but I have conditions." She ticked them off on her fingers. "First, no more secrets. If you're planning something dangerous, I need to know, not after it happens, not when it's too late to stop it. I need to be part of the decision." "Agreed." "Second, my clinic stays mine. I'm not giving up my work or my independence. I spent 8 years building that practice, and it matters to me. I wouldn't ask you to. Third, if we have kids someday, and that's a big if, they get to choose their own path. No pressure to join the family business. No expectation that they'll become criminals just because their father is one." Cassian's throat worked. "That's not a condition. That's a given. I would never force my children into this life." "Good. Then we're clear." Marin stood, moving around the desk to stand in front of him. I'm choosing to stay, Cassian, not because I'm scared to leave or because I don't know what else to do. I'm staying because somewhere between you bleeding on my floor and watching you nearly die to protect me, I fell for you, the real you. Not the crime boss, not the dangerous man with a fortress and an army. The man who bakes when he's stressed and reads philosophy and looks at me like I'm the first honest thing he's ever touched. Cassian stood slowly, his hands coming up to cup her face with a tenderness that didn't match the violence those same hands were capable of. You're sure? No, I'm terrified, but I'm choosing it anyway. He kissed her then, not desperate like before, but deliberate and thorough, like he was memorizing the shape of her mouth, the taste of her, the way she leaned into him despite everything they'd survived. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cassian rested his forehead against hers. I love you, he said quietly. I know it's fast and probably insane, and definitely not something I should be saying after dragging you through hell. But I love you, Marin Vale, and I will spend every day for the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me. Marin's eyes burned. I love you too, which is probably the worst decision I've ever made. Definitely the worst. But I'm making it anyway. They stood there in his office, wrapped around each other, and for the first time since this nightmare began, Marin felt something that wasn't fear or adrenaline or desperation. She felt hope. 2 weeks later, Marin stood in her clinic for the first time since Draven's men had come asking questions. The place looked exactly the same. Same exam tables, same supplies, same faint smell of antiseptic and wet dog. But everything felt different. She walked through slowly, trailing her fingers over familiar surfaces, and found the spot on the floor where Cassian had bled. Someone had cleaned it, probably Dario's cleanup crew, but Marin could still see it in her mind. The beginning of everything. You okay? Cassian asked from the doorway. He'd insisted on accompanying her back, protective instinct overriding the fact that Draven was dead and the threats neutralized. Yeah, just strange being back. Marin moved to her desk, picked up a framed photo of Atlas. Feels like a different life. It was a different life. You're not the same person who left here. No, I'm not. She set down the photo and turned to face him. But I'm still a veterinarian. That part hasn't changed. Good. The world needs more vets who aren't afraid to tell armed criminals to get the hell out of their clinic. Despite everything, Marin smiled. That was possibly the stupidest thing I've ever done. Or the bravest. Same thing in my experience. They spent the next hour going through the clinic, checking inventory, making sure nothing had been disturbed during her absence. Jenny had handled the emergency calls and kept everything running, and Marin made a mental note to give her a raise. A big one. She was restocking the medication cabinet when she heard the front door open. Marin froze, muscle memory kicking in, hand moving toward the gun Dario had made her promise to keep nearby. Dr. Vale? A familiar voice. Mrs. Henderson with her ancient Persian cat. Are you back? Muffin's been having trouble with her kidney medication again. Marin let out a breath and holstered the gun. I'm here. Come on back. The rest of the day passed in a blur of appointments, routine checkups, vaccine schedules, a golden retriever with an ear infection. Normal, mundane, exactly what Marin's life used to be before it exploded. But Cassian was there in her office between patients, working on his laptop and making calls, his presence a constant reminder that normal had shifted permanently to include him. Around 6, the last patient left and Marin locked the front door. She found Cassian in her office, staring at something on his screen with a furrowed brow. Problem? She asked. Maybe. Victor's asking to meet with me. Says he has information about a potential threat. Marin's stomach tightened. The same Victor who wanted me dead? The same. But he's been loyal to the syndicate for 15 years. If he says there's a threat, I need to take it seriously. Cassian looked up at her. I'm telling you because we agreed. No secrets. I appreciate that. Marin sat on the edge of her desk. What kind of threat? He wouldn't say over the phone, just that it's related to Draven's organization and we need to move fast. When? Tomorrow morning, at the fortress. Cassian closed his laptop. You don't have to be there. This is syndicate business. If it affects you, it affects me. I'm coming. Marin, we're in this together, remember? That means I don't hide when things get complicated. Cassian studied her for a long moment, then nodded. Okay, but you stay with Dario, and if shooting starts, you run. Deal. They drove back to the fortress as the sun set, painting the mountains in shades of gold and crimson. Marin watched the landscape blur past and tried to ignore the anxiety crawling up her spine. Victor had wanted her dead, had argued that she was a liability the syndicate couldn't afford. What kind of information could he possibly have that required a face-to-face meeting? Nothing good, her instincts whispered. The next morning, Marin found herself back in the war room, Dario at her side, watching Cassian and Serena prepare to meet with Victor. The older man arrived exactly on time, his face as scarred and unreadable as ever. Victor, Cassian said, gesturing to a chair. What's this about? Victor sat, his movements deliberate. I've been going through Draven's records, the ones we seized from his compound, and I found something concerning. What? A ledger, detailing payments made to someone inside our organization. Large payments, regular payments, going back almost 2 years. Victor pulled out a tablet and slid it across the table. We have a mole, Cassian, and they've been feeding information to Draven's people since long before the ambush that nearly killed you. The room went silent. Cassian picked up the tablet, his face going hard as he scrolled through the data. These payments stopped 3 weeks ago, right after Draven died because their employer was dead and there was no one left to pay them. Do we know who it is? Not yet. The payments were made through shell companies, cryptocurrency, the usual methods to avoid detection, but I'm narrowing it down. There are only about 30 people in the organization with access to the kind of information Draven was getting. Serena leaned forward, her voice sharp. 30 suspects is too many. We need a way to flush them out. I have an idea, Victor said slowly, but you're not going to like it. Try me. We leak false information about a high-value shipment, something valuable enough that Draven's remaining associates would want to intercept it. We control the leak, limit it to specific suspects. Whoever takes the bait and passes the information along reveals themselves. Cassian's jaw tightened. You're talking about a sting operation. I'm talking about finding the person who's been betraying us for 2 years and nearly got you killed. Victor's voice was cold. This isn't just about security anymore. This is about trust. And if we can't trust our own people, we're already dead. He's right, Serena said quietly. We need to know who it is before they sell us out to the next threat. Cassian looked at Marin and she saw the question in his eyes. She gave a small nod. They'd agreed. No secrets. That meant facing threats together, even when it was dangerous. Fine, Cassian said. Set it up. But carefully. I don't want innocent people caught in the crossfire. Understood. Victor stood. I'll have a plan by tomorrow. He left, and the room erupted into tactical discussions. Marin listened from the sidelines, trying to follow the web of contingencies and fail-safes they were building. This was Cassian's world, layers of deception and counter-deception, where trust was currency and betrayal was death. And she'd chosen to be part of it. The sting operation went live 3 days later. Cassian leaked information about a weapons shipment coming through the port, valuable enough to draw attention, but not so valuable that losing it would cripple the organization. The information was compartmentalized, given to only 10 people, all of whom had the access and opportunity to be the mole. Then they waited. Marin spent those days at the fortress, watching Cassian and his team monitor communications, track movements, and slowly narrow down the suspects. It was methodical, boring, and terrifying all at once. On the 4th day, Ivan burst into the operations room, his face grim. We have movement. Someone contacted a known associate of Draven's, passed along details about the shipment. Who? Cassian demanded. Marcus Webb. The room went silent. Marcus, the operations chief who'd sat in on the strategy meetings, who'd helped plan the raid on Draven's compound, who'd been with the syndicate for over a decade. You're sure? Serena asked, her voice deadly quiet. Positive. The communication was encrypted, but we traced it back to his device. He's the mole. Cassian's hands clenched into fists on the table. Where's he now? His apartment. We've had eyes on him since the communication went out. He hasn't moved. Good. Pick him up, quietly. I want him in an interrogation room in 30 minutes. Dario and a tactical team left immediately. Marin watched them go, her stomach churning. She'd met Marcus, had sat across from him in meetings. He'd seemed professional, competent, loyal, and he'd been selling them out the entire time. 28 minutes later, Marcus Webb was dragged into a windowless room in the fortress basement, his hands zip-tied, his face bruised where he'd tried to fight the extraction team. Cassian, Serena, and Victor stood waiting. Marin watched from behind one-way glass, Dario beside her. "Marcus," Cassian said, his voice flat, "want to tell me what you've been doing?" "I don't know what you're talking about." "Don't lie to me. We have the communications. We have the bank records. We know you've been feeding information to Draven for almost 2 years. Cassian stepped closer, his voice dropping to something dangerous. "What I want to know is why." Marcus's jaw worked, defiance flickering across his face. Then it crumbled, replaced by something that looked almost like relief. "Money," he said simply. "Draven paid better than you did, and he promised me a position in his organization when he took over. So you sold us out for a paycheck and a promotion. I sold out a criminal organization to another criminal organization. Don't act like you're some kind of hero, Cassian. We're all just trying to survive in this world." "Survival doesn't mean betraying the people who trusted you." Serena's voice cut like a blade. "You nearly got my brother killed. You put Dr. Vale in danger. You compromised every operation we ran for 2 years. And I'd do it again." Marcus looked directly at Cassian. "You think you're better than Draven? You're not. You're just another thug with a suit and a fortune built on blood. At least Draven was honest about what he was." Cassian's expression didn't change, but Marin saw his hand shake, barely perceptible, quickly controlled. "You're right about one thing. I'm not a hero. I'm a criminal running a criminal organization, but I protect my people. I don't sell them out for profit." "Your people," Marcus laughed bitterly. "Your people are terrified of you. They follow you because refusing means death. That's not loyalty, Cassian. That's fear." "Then you should be very afraid right now." Victor stepped forward, pulling out a gun. Marcus's eyes went wide. "Wait, we had a deal. Draven promised me protection." "Draven's dead," Victor said flatly. "And deals made with dead men don't count." He raised the gun. "Stop!" Cassian's voice cut through the tension. "Not like this." Victor paused. "He's a traitor. He dies. That's protocol. I know the protocol, but I'm changing it." Cassian looked at Marcus with something that might have been pity. "You're right that I'm not a hero, but I'm trying to be better than the men who came before me. Which means you don't die in my basement like some mob movie cliché." "Then what?" Marcus asked, his voice shaking. "You go to the authorities. You confess to your crimes. All of them. Money laundering, conspiracy, accessory to attempted murder. You take full responsibility." Cassian's voice was cold. "And you never mention my name, my organization, or anyone associated with us. You're a lone wolf who got in over his head. Understood?" Marcus stared at him. "You're handing me to the police? I'm giving you a chance to live, probably 15 to 20 years in federal prison, but alive. Take it or leave it. Why?" Cassian glanced at the one-way glass, and Marin knew he was looking at her even though he couldn't see her. "Because someone once told me that the best thing you can do for people is refuse to give up on them, even when everyone else already has. I'm not giving up on the idea that you might still have a shred of humanity worth saving. I betrayed you. I know, and you'll pay for that. But not with your life, not today." Victor looked like he wanted to argue, but Serena put a hand on his arm. "Cassian's decision. We follow it." 2 hours later, Marcus Webb was in federal custody, confessing to crimes that would put him away for decades, but carefully omitting anything that would implicate the Rook Syndicate. The mole was neutralized. The threat was over. Marin found Cassian on the terrace where this had all begun, staring out at the mountains with a glass of whiskey in his hand. "That was brave," she said quietly. "What you did with Marcus. It was stupid, sentimental. Victor's going to think I'm going soft." "Maybe you are. Is that so bad?" Cassian turned to look at her, and in the fading light she could see the exhaustion written on his face. "In my world, it can get you killed. Or it can make you better than the men who came before you." Marin moved to stand beside him at the railing. "You gave him a chance. That matters." "Does it? He still betrayed us. Still nearly got you killed. But he's alive, and Maybe someday in prison he'll think about the fact that you showed him mercy when you could have shown him violence. Maybe that'll change something in him. You're an optimist. I'm a realist who chooses to hope anyway. Marin took the whiskey from his hand and took a sip, the burn grounding her. Besides, you did it for me. I saw you look at the glass. You were thinking about what I said in my clinic that first day, about refusing to give up on things everyone else has written off. Cassian's mouth twitched. You're too perceptive for your own good. One of my many flaws. He pulled her close, wrapping his arms around her, and they stood together watching the sun set over the mountains. The fortress sprawled behind them, full of armed guards and security systems, and the machinery of a criminal empire. But in that moment, with Cassian's heartbeat steady against her cheek, Marin felt something she hadn't felt in weeks. Peace. 6 months later, Marin stood in her clinic, stitching up a border collie who'd gotten into a fight with a porcupine. The procedure was delicate, quills embedded deep in the dog's muzzle, each one requiring careful extraction. She worked methodically, her hands steady, while the dog's owner watched anxiously from the corner. He's going to be fine, Marin said, tying off the last stitch. But keep him away from wildlife for a while. He's clearly not learning his lesson. The owner laughed, relieved, and gathered his dog carefully. Thank you, Dr. Vale. I don't know what we'd do without you. After he left, Marin cleaned up the exam room and checked her schedule. 2 more appointments today, then she was meeting Cassian for dinner. Their lives had settled into a routine that was equal parts normal and surreal. She ran her clinic, he ran his empire, and they came together in the spaces between. It wasn't perfect. There were still nights when Marin woke gasping from nightmares about Draven's compound, still moments when she caught herself reaching for a gun that wasn't there. The violence she'd witnessed had left scars that might never fully heal, but she was learning to live with them. The clinic door opened and Serena walked in, dressed impeccably as always, carrying a manila envelope. Serena? Marin said, surprised. What are you doing here? Delivering something. Serena handed her the envelope. Open it. Inside were legal documents, deed transfers, mortgage releases, trust documents. Marin scanned them quickly, her eyes widening. This is my clinic. You're transferring ownership to me? I already own it. You owned it with a mortgage that would have taken you another 12 years to pay off. Now you own it free and clear. Consider it a gift. Serena, I can't accept. You can and you will. My brother wanted to do this months ago, but I convinced him you'd react exactly like this and refuse, so I'm doing it instead, and you can be mad at me instead of him. Serena's smile was sharp. Besides, you've earned it. You saved his life twice. This is the least we can do. Marin stared at the documents, her throat tight. Thank you. Don't thank me. Just keep making my brother happy. He's been insufferable lately, actually smiling at staff meetings, cooking elaborate meals, reading poetry. It's disturbing. Despite herself, Marin laughed. I'll do my best. Serena turned to leave, then paused at the door. One more thing. We're having a family dinner next week. You're expected to be there. And bring that monster dog of yours. Cassian's been talking about building him a custom bed. Atlas would love that. I'm sure he would. See you then, Dr. Vale. She left in a sweep of designer clothes and expensive perfume, and Marin stood in her clinic. Her clinic, owned free and clear, holding legal documents that represented freedom and acceptance and a future she'd never imagined. That evening, Marin drove to the fortress, Atlas in the passenger seat, as always. The guards at the gate waved her through without stopping. She had a key now, access to all the secure areas, her own parking spot near the main entrance. She was part of the family, whether she'd planned for it or not. She found Cassian in the kitchen, surrounded by ingredients and cooking with the focused intensity he brought to everything. Music played softly, something classical she didn't recognize. What are you making? Marin asked, setting her bag on the counter. Coco Van, my grandmother's recipe. Figured it was time I tried it without her supervision. He looked up and smiled, and the expression transformed his face from dangerous to devastating. How was your day? Good. Removed about 40 porcupine quills from a very stubborn border collie. Oh, and your sister gave me my clinic as a gift. Cassian's hand stilled on the knife he was using to chop vegetables. She what? Paid off my mortgage. Transferred everything to a trust in my name, said it was a gift from the family. I told her to wait. She said you'd say that. Marin moved closer, wrapping her arms around him from behind. Thank you for wanting to do that for me. You've given up a lot to be here. The least I can do is make sure you keep the things that matter to you. You matter to me. I know, still getting used to that. He turned in her arms, his hand settling on her waist. I have something else for you. Not as practical as real estate, but hopefully meaningful. He pulled a small box from his pocket and handed it to her. Marin's heart kicked up. Cassian, open it before you panic. Inside was a key. Simple, silver, attached to a keychain shaped like a dog. It's to the house, Cassian said quietly. Not the fortress. A house I bought in Portland. 3 bedrooms, fenced yard for Atlas, close to your clinic but far enough from the organization that you can have a normal life when you want one. I know you've been staying here with me, but I thought you might want space that's yours. Ours, if you want. But primarily, yours. Marin stared at the key, her vision blurring. You bought me a house. I bought us a future, if you want it. His voice was uncertain in a way she'd never heard before. I know this world is complicated. I know loving me means accepting things most people never have to think about. But I want to build something with you that isn't just survival and strategy. I want a home. With you. If you'll have me. Marin looked up at him, this man who'd stumbled bleeding into her clinic and changed everything. His world was dangerous and violent and built on foundation she still didn't fully understand. But it was also full of loyalty and protection and fierce, desperate love that he'd been taught to hide but chose to show her anyway. Yes, she said. I'll have you. I'll have the house, and the dog bed, and the complicated future. All of it. Cassian's relief was palpable. He kissed her, thorough and claiming, tasting like wine and promise. Good, he said when they finally broke apart, because I already had furniture delivered, and I may have built Atlas that custom bed without waiting for your answer. Presumptuous, confident. Same thing. Completely different. They argued playfully while Cassian finished cooking, falling into the rhythm they'd developed over months of learning each other. Marin set the table. Atlas sprawled on the kitchen floor, content. Music played. Wine was poured. And for a few hours, they were just 2 people sharing a meal, the violence and danger of their lives kept at bay by ordinary domestic rituals. After dinner, they sat on the terrace under a sky full of stars, wrapped in blankets against the October chill. Marin's head rested on Cassian's shoulder, his arm around her waist, both of them quiet and content. I never thanked you, Cassian said after a long silence. For what? For opening the door that night, for choosing compassion when you could have chosen safety, for saving my life, and then choosing to keep me in yours even after you knew what I was. His voice was rough. I don't deserve you, Marin, but I'm selfish enough to keep you anyway. Good. Because I'm selfish enough to keep you too. Marin tilted her head to look at him. We're probably terrible for each other. Definitely. But I don't care. Neither do I. They sat there as the night deepened around them. 2 people who should never have met, building a future from blood and compassion and impossible choices. The road ahead wouldn't be easy. Marin knew that. There would be more threats, more violence, more moments when she'd have to decide who she wanted to be in a world that demanded everything. But she'd face them with Cassian beside her, with Atlas at her feet, with a clinic that was truly hers and a home waiting in Portland. She'd face them knowing she'd survived the worst already and come out stronger for it. Her love for Cassian hadn't begun cleanly. It had started with blood on a clinic floor, lies in the dark, desperate choices made under pressure. It had grown through fire and fear, ambushes and betrayals, moments when they'd both thought they'd lose each other. But it was real, messy and complicated and built on foundations that shouldn't hold, but real nonetheless. And in the end, that was enough. The stars wheeled overhead. The mountains stood silent witness. And in a fortress built for war, 2 people who'd found each other in the worst possible way sat wrapped together, choosing love despite everything, choosing each other despite the cost, choosing to build something beautiful from the wreckage of the lives they'd left behind. And that, Marin thought as Cassian's hand found hers in the darkness, was the only ending that mattered.